go. Not saying that. Not saying. Not saying, baby. Yes, sir. Yo.
Demigods, demigods of Asia, the direct offspring. Still, it's yes, that observing policies. Anyway, what's really interesting about this is that it's just a very old legend, one that predates Valania and all the found in Canada. And so, to understand where we have to go up to the late front, where you can find a few Bible descriptions that speak of this time. In the southeast, where the mushrooms that fall into this temple, and it reads, and the rest of this sentence made up the mushrooms that which are considered holy vestments of those corruption by the Scarlet World, which push them to the earth. So already we have this hierarchy of mushroom bodies that serve the Scarlet back then, as well as worshippers who venerate. Anyway, I think it's strange that these beings might worship or serve the secrets, but the Scarlet World is so much more than that. The Scarlet World is going to be a disease. For that, not only need clones, they're still inorganic beings, and yet they can be afflicted by the drug just like any other. See that some crystallians that are infused with rot and spread it to others as well. This is not really just a disease. Instead, I feel like rot calls it the divine essence of Neptune, something that was sealed away long ago in this underground world. And if you've been following cultivating Earth and length of time, should no strangers to go. They are these indeterminable, abstract beings that impress and order upon the world, their avatars, their servants, and their destinies. And in the case of the Scarlet Rot, its order is one of decay, where beings are put into a progressing state of death with the intent to achieve this glorious rebirth that will follow the process. The Poison Armor description tells us this, saying that those who dwell in poison know rot all too well, the death that begets life that comes to the say it is the cycle of birth put into practice. An example of this is Nicholas Hale tree, which might be completely dead were it not for the fungal growths that have sprouted on the tree. And of course, we also see this where flowers of the rot are the precipice nothing despite. And of course, it's debatable whether this type of life is desirable at all, but you can't argue that it is life, and the agents of the rot god certainly find it desirable. So they do their utmost to spark this sacred cycle of rebirth in others, affecting the poison and rot, and putting this cycle of rebirth into practice. On that note, there is one extremely curious item that you can find down in the cloister, and it's called the Scorpion Stick. This is a dagger that's glistening with scarlet moat, and it's called a ceremony, which I think means that any ceremony that used this dagger would have been a ceremony to stab and infect another being with the scarlet moat. It's been a ceremony of spreading their dreaded affliction to others. But what's really interesting about this dagger is that it's fashioned from a great scorpion's tail, and it's also specifically said to have been crafted from the relic of a sealed mountain god. And consider that phrasing, you realize that saying that this dagger was fashioned from a relic of the rot god was also a great scorpion. That's what it sounds like it's said. In many historical records in our history are often the physical remains of deceased saints, holy persons, so the rot might really be, or at least might have manifested as a scorpion. So I guess the scorpion stinger is kind of like the eye of the fell god, with 3 fingers of hold to be the death as we call it. It's a small remaining hint of the visual identity of these ephemeral artworks that is intended to stimulate the imagination, even if we never truly find out what these artworks. So whatever rot truly is, its scarlet rot essence was eventually sealed, at least. This was done by a legendary figure known as the Blind Swordsman. As the story goes, the Blind Swordsman was favored by a fairy called the Dancer Blue. The fairy bestowed upon them a flowing sword, which was patterned after flowing water, and with this sword, the Blind Swordsman sealed away an ancient god, a god that was rot itself. There's quite a bit to unpack in these descriptions. First, what was the fairy called the Blue Dancer? Well, I think that the warrior's blue cloth set gives us a clue. It reveals that the blue colour of its fabric symbolises brisk waters, and the cloth doll that represents the Blue Dancer is styled to look just like water. The description goes on to say that just as still waters turn foul, stagnation leads to decay, so warriors must remain ever drifting. It's essentially saying that flowing water is the very antithesis of rot, which thrives in stagnant water. And I think, and this is just speculation, but I think that the Blue Fairy might essentially be a sort of river spirit. If you have seen Hayao Miyazaki's Spirited Away, then you might know what type of being I'm talking about. In that movie, just quickly, a stinking sled monster comes to the bathhouse, where it is eventually revealed that it's actually a river spirit whose river was bogged down and corrupted by it. So once his waters are unblocked, the river spirit is restored. Elden Ring, by comparison, does also have 2 legendary rivers called the Shifra and the Zone, which just so happened to flow underground next to and around the scarlet rot that was eventually sealed that time ago. So I don't think that it's a stretch to might occupy or might have been a supernatural extension of those underground rivers. I think it's fun here. And I think it helps to explain the Blue Fairy's relationship with water and why it might be a natural enemy of the rock god. So, Blue Fairy gives the Blind Swordsman a flowing sword. He fought with the power of flowing water to seal away the rock god. But what's unclear is how exactly the Scarlet Rock God was. Did he, sword in hand, battle a great scorpion boss in one-on-one combat and just seal its essence away? Or was their battle more of an abstract one, where the Eternal City dams were built, rivers were rerouted to encircle the rot and tame it underground, or something like that? These details are left to your imagination, but one way or another, the Scarlet Rot God was sealed away, but it was not defeated, and eventually it would return, and this time it would do so in an Imperial vessel, corrupting Melania, a demigod, the very moment of her birth. Like her mother, Melania was an Imperial, meaning she was essentially a valid to replace Queen Melania as a god, and as such it seems she was quite for an God's meddling. It's unclear how the Lord God did Melania as soon as she was born, but it did. That's a shame, because Melania's great rune does state that it should have been the most sacred rune of them all, were it not for what I assume was the Rock God's method. And speaking of great runes, in the sister video to this one, we talk about how Mikla was essentially the flip side to Melania in many ways, especially in Platypod where the queens were one of the center of fate and said to hold the runes of both abundance and decay between them. And to reflect this, well, it seems, Mikla is in this constant state of overflowing abundance, while Melania was in this constant state of overflowing death, essentially. We sort of see this tragedy unfolding in a few statues of Melania, since you can see back then she did actually have all the limbs at some time, until the rot continued to take hold, moving her inexorably towards her inevitable death and birth as well. And that must have felt inevitable, for it seemed like in these early days there were few known ways to ward off the rot. Fire was probably the obvious one, but then there was also the act of consecration which was used, which is essentially the act of declaring something as sacred, which was done to the weaponry of Melania and her knights, and apparently it helped their armaments, at least, to resist the rot. Their flesh was still susceptible. Melania's knights were therefore called the Clean-Named Knights, and they vowed to fight
Bitch, motherfucker!
if putrefaction of their flesh, and it was this fact that made these warriors so fierce, for they had basically already accepted their terrible fate, and so logically they had nothing else to lose in battle. These knights were bestowed the winged sword insignia, given only to those who fought alongside Melania the Severed. Mostly, this is the item that gives Melania the title the Severed. I assume that is referencing a time where Melania was known for her prowess, despite her fragmented body, as it's called in the Japanese. And I guess it's possible that she wasn't yet known as the Blade of Mikla at the time, though that's just my own speculation. At any rate, Melania Blade of Mikla is her most common title, and it's easy to see why she would dedicate herself to her brother fully. For her brother was so dismayed by her condition that he dedicated himself to finding a treatment for the world. And this search for a cure dramatically affected Mikla's worldview. For instance, he was formerly a faithful fundamentalist of the Golden Order, with all the magic to boot, but he would abandon those practices as they could do nothing to treat his sister's accursed rot. Instead, he pursued a path of unalloyed gold, and he crafted for Melania a needle that inserted into her flesh, granting relief from the rot and preventing the progression of the rotting sickness. If you're interested in why unalloyed gold was able to do this and work that way, then I recommend checking out this video afterwards, which talks at length about Mikla. But we learn about the needle's specific effects in-game when we give it to a character called Millicent, who is also suffering from the Scarlet Rot. Millicent is this great parallel to Melania that teaches us so much about what Melania might have felt or experienced. So Millicent too has lost a limb, and she is also losing her memories, and when you find her, she is unable to even move. but as soon as we give her the needle, she's able to function and fight once more. Therefore, it's fair to assume that similar benefits were conferred on the lady when they gave her the needle. It's also worth noting that the multiple needles that we find in here, they aren't finished. Even the final version of this needle can only be used in the time at Azuma, where it allows you to cheat fate, essentially. And that makes sense here, because you're outside of time in this place, so it can prevent these afflictions from the outer gods before they can happen. So perhaps if Mikola had been able to imbue his needle with some time capabilities, he could have eventually undone the effects of the rot god entirely, but again, it was unfortunately infinite. The needle is old, and Mikola created with unlimited mold. He also crafted for his sister a prosthetic arm, leg, helmet, and armor of unlit gold, which, again, like Millicent, surely allowed her to overcome her one-armed shortcoming and reach for newer heights as a fighter. So, Melania's prospects were already looking up, but things didn't end there. For Melania would go on to meet a man who would become her mentor, and he would give her this finely valuable tool that would be employed against the Scarlet Rod. We see their meeting play out on this of the prosthesis wearer end, which depicts a scene from a Nordic tale. You can even see Melania's prosthetic arm and leg in this image if you look closely, which is why I assume that this meeting took place after Nicola's intervention with all of the alloyed gold prosthetics. So, her mentor was, as you might have guessed, the blind swordsman, the man who first sealed away the rot all those years ago, the very same. And after encountering her mentor and his flowing blade, she gained wings of unparalleled strength. This meeting says a lot about the blind swordsman. He must have known that Melania was basically inhabited by his ancient enemy, and yet he doesn't attempt to kill her here. Instead, he takes her under his wing and teaches her the techniques that he himself once used to curtail the rot in the first place. It's a pretty wise thing to do, and perhaps we shouldn't expect any less from someone who was able to defeat an outer god in the first place. So this is why the skill on Melania's blade is called the Water Vow Dance. This is why Melania recovers health by attacking during her boss fight. Relentlessly, like flowing water, the damage of the rot was offset, and Melania was able to achieve unlimited strength and to maintain her pride. But it was that same pride that she would abandon in her fight with Radahn. Radahn was born of Queen Nala, who was the Queen of Paria, and King Consort Radahn, who was previously a great champion of the Earth. Thus was the Order of the Moon and the Moon Tree joined. And while Radahn was a true Parian, and certainly proficient in the art of sorcery, we can see his character and inclination towards another path, an aspiration to be like what Brixton was the first elder lord, and also his father Radigan, who would up this development. Paria was, after all, a largely matriarchal society, meaning that power was passed down to princesses in the family. So perhaps it's no surprise that Radahn was not as motivated by his current heritage compared to his sister Rani, for instance. So Radahn's set was decorated with a golden lion that symbolized luxury in Disney's regent, and it states that from his youngest years, Radahn was naturally captivated by the world. Then his golden helmet was designed with his flaming red hair in it, which Radahn inherited from his father, drawing attention to the fact that he was fond of the heroic implications of Nicholas. Radahn and his knights were fittingly known as the Red Mane, which conflates Radahn's red hair with the mane of Valkyrie's lion, and Radahn was even quoted as saying, "I was born a champion's son. Now I am the lord of the battlefields lion," which borders on being a statement of complete loyalty to Godfrey and the Golden Bird, but we'll get to that debate a bit later.
No.
So, naturally, this was a guy who reveled in the art of warfare, and Even in his youth as a Carrion Royal, it seems Radahn was already a renowned general. We infer this because of a man named Karen. The eccentric Sama specifically says that after spending time as a guest in Carrion Royals, he became a guest commander for General Radahn. Therefore, Radahn must have still been in close contact with his Carrion family, as Jaren met Radahn through his Carrion Royals, and when they did meet, Jaren and Radahn seemed to immediately share a certain bond. For despite Jaren preferring to have a nomadic existence, he decided to become a guest commander for General Radahn. And then, despite the temporary implication of such a title, Jaren, this restless patrolman, as he was called, would become bound an honorable oath, and he and Radahn swore a vow of honor and death to one another, promising that they would die honorably in battle, even if it was death by the other's hand. So it's not stated which battles that Radahn was fighting at the time, nor which war he required guest commander for. But then the world was very different at the time, and there's so much of the Lantern Queen's history that we don't know about. So I guess it's possible that the battles were being fought for distant lands like Lingrave and Caelid. The Lingrave East map does say, after all, that this path here was trod by many a soldier in the past. Maybe Radahn's forces took this path as well. And this was before Caelid was even afflicted with the Scarlet Rot, so things might have looked really different here, although admittedly we do have this shot from this trailer that shows that it still kind of looks a bit like White Hell's here with the red sky. This was technically before the Scarlet Red call. Caelid did still have some culture to boast of though. For example, in the very middle of Caelid, there was a town of sorcery called Celia, and despite Radahn's relationship with Aria, Ryle Aria as well, presumably, it was here in Celia he studied, learning gravitational magics that likely could not be taught anywhere else. He did this, as the story goes, all so he would never have to abandon his beloved but scorned steed, for gravitational magics could relieve the weight of Radahn and allow his scrawny horse to carry him evermore. Also, in case you don't know, the horse's name is Leonard, according to the data, so that is the name that we're going to use going forward. What's interesting about Leonard is that he specifically called out as being scrawny, as if that's the reason why he can't carry Radahn, who is enormous. Shouldn't Radahn's size be the reason why he can't ride his horse? So I think, personally, that Radahn actually didn't become as large as he is for a very long time. I think there's some good evidence to back that up. For one, his throne in Leyndell is of regular size. Two, his portrait is of a simple green man. And lastly, we see a brief shot of Radahn fighting in this image, where he barely even matches Orm in size. So, personally, I think that Radahn probably only grew in size when he acquired a ring. At this stage, anyway, it's clear that Radahn initially learned gravitation magic for the sake of his horse, but gravitational skill set certainly come in handy as the years went on. For one, these gravitational magics were passed on to some of his elite souls, like Logan, who was the longest-serving member of the Red Maid Knights, studying techniques to manipulate gravity alongside Radahn. The equipment and skill sets of the Red Maid Knights really were very inspired by Radahn. For instance, the sword of Radahn's Red Maid Knights depicts red and fire raising a sword to Radahn, all proved that they were worthy of the Red Maid name. Even their great shields design takes that symbolism of a being shaped like a fang and featuring the crest of the Red Maid lion. And these knights were strong, like Radahn too, with descriptions stating that they were reputed to be master warriors, and it was popularly said that the Red Maids knew no weakness. But for all of their prowess in battle, conflict was that no military strength way. And I'm not talking about the Scarlet Red, I'm talking about the stars. And luckily, for this upcoming conflict, Radahn was able to solicit the help of an extremely knowledgeable teacher. According to the Gravity Well sorcery, Radahn's master was an alabaster with skin of stone, and these Onyx and Alabaster Lords were a different race entirely to humans, and were said to have risen to life when a meteor struck long ago. And meteorite sorcery tells us that the reason they were born was in reverential fear of their destructive power. It seems like Radahn was soliciting their help because a similarly meteoric destructive power was on its way to Selly. So earlier we established that he explicitly did learn gravitational magic so that he could ride his horse, but the collapsing stars sorcery also explicitly says that he learned gravitational techniques so that he could challenge the stars, which I think suggests that there were two distinct periods of learning here for Radahn. Learning for the sake of his horse, and then learning for the sake of keeping Celia safe. And there's also quite a bit of evidence that suggests that Radahn's intentions here were in defense. For example, the Sword of Stone specifically tells us that Radahn held Celia secure. The Star Scourge heirloom tells us that Radahn inflicted falling stars as if they pieces. Finally, this event was also called Star Scourge conflict, suggesting that there was a clash of some kind, like so Radahn seems to anticipate this event was coming, but I guess that isn't so strange when you consider that Radahn was of Clarion lineage, who were renowned for leading fate in the stars. So I would think that anticipating Starfall would be pretty straightforward for them, and I think it would make sense that Radahn would want to intervene if it was headed for Celia, which is where he learned his magic from in the first place. And so Radahn took defensive measures, and I guess you might argue that he even went a bit overboard, for he didn't just defend Celia from the falling stars, he actually sealed the stars' movements completely. So after Radahn challenged the stars, to the night sky was said to and this manifests quite literally in Rani's questline version, where Radahn has to be killed so that the stars freeze, so that one of them can literally smash into him and open a path to Nothing. If not for Radahn, I feel like a star would have smashed Celia instead and opened a path to Nothing. Like those years ago, the eternal city of Nothing is said, after all, to exist below Celia. Radahn really wanted to meet here at the very last moment. Since the star is released and hits Limbo as soon as you kill Radahn. But I'll admit that it is a bit strange that that star hits Limbo and not Celia, which he was sent to. I wonder why. Anyway, there's one more thing. It's that you can also make the argument that Radahn might have intervened at Celia and frozen the stars on behalf of the Golden Order. After all, telescope item description literally says that the fate once writ in the night skies was fettered by the Golden Order, and Radahn was a fanboy of Radigan and Godfrey, who were two opponents of the Golden Order, so it's definitely possible that he did this on the behalf. Personally, though, I think that both must be true. I think Radahn was clearly motivated to defend Celia from Starfall, and I think that the Golden Order did stand to benefit from one of its vassals achieving such a feat. Radahn, and most of the demigods at that stage, for that matter, were technically on the side of Marika's Golden Order. So I guess technically Radahn was aligned with the Golden Order and would have fettered the stars on their behalf. Technically. But the impression that I get from Radahn is that he has no real loyalty to anyone other than himself and his men. This is my speculation, but I think this because he's not really hated by anyone in the current age, anyone in the game. Even his brother Vikard has his picture up on the wall, and Vikard famously did anything to do with the Golden Order. So while I think Radahn served the intent of Golden Order, I don't think he was beholden to it, especially not in later years when the Order was shattered. Because remember this cutscene, Morgoth? Traitors. Morgoth blames all of the demigods as traitors to the Golden Order, including Radahn, who we do see in a clash with Morgoth, suggesting that he might have abandoned his loyalty to Order and marched on Leyndell after the shattering. kin had claimed Blake. And it's easy to assume that a warmonger like him would have had intentions. Might have even aspired to become Elder Lord. And it's around this time, when the demigods were clashing, that Melania enters the picture once more. As Melania, blatantly, was marching towards him, past Godwin in the grave, and towards Radon.
I'll speak up, there's nothing for that. Thank you. Lord, I'll tell Big Ben that. First, he hid himself amongst the women folk to flee the capital, then hid from Radon in that bus. Salt Melania lost her battle, so lick her boots after dying like a man. Has she no shame? The big louse.
Style that fight is famous, as it tells us about this crucial late part of the Shattering War. At this point, Godric had just failed to usurp Blainville and had fled with his tail between his legs to storm them. Here, he hid in the form of Radon, who was a close neighbor. It makes sense that he defeat Radon, who was considered by many to be the strongest of the demigods. But while he was fighting here, a different army approached from the south, as Godric must have feared. Melania and her clean rod knights were passing Stormvale on their southwards march from the Hilling Creek to. And this event, this passing, is marked at the Ligonia Highway salt gravestones, which state the end of the wings of Blade and Migla and the clean rod knights. These gravestones tend to mark points of battle, and Kenneth does state that Godric insulted Melania and lost to her in battle, so I assume this is where that happened. As to the nature of the insult, well, we have a dialogue with Godric to help us out here.
There is only one tree, branches, 2 rings of gold, not fully 15, nor the Malcolm wins.
So Godric considered Migla and Melania rank and malformed. So I assume the insult was along those lines, which was not smart on Godric's part. Melania must have messed him up, but tellingly she did not know him. And that's a curious detail because this was the Shattering War. We're supposed to believe that all of the demigods were fighting for power, but if Melania was seeking power here and looking for others' great wounds to acquire in order to restore the Elden Ring and live up to her own promise, then you'd think that she would have killed Godric, that she wouldn't have shown mercy. But instead, she lets him live. So, to me, that suggests that Melania might not have been on this southward march to take power. Because if she didn't claim Godric's great rune, then she probably wasn't here for Radan's either. So, why did Melania come to full force towards Radon on this southward march? I feel like there are 3 options. 4 if you count the theory that Melania might have chased down Radon in order to get authority on the ring, but as I've just explained, I feel like that's unlikely. Option 2, but still unlikely in my opinion, is that Melania might have sought out Radon simply for the sake of fighting him. He was, after all, widely considered the mightiest of the demigods, as was Melania in many cases. So it's not ridiculous to think that both of them might have fought simply for the sake of pitting their strength against one another, but that's a pretty unsatisfactory answer, in my opinion. I feel it could be because Melania was looking for her brother. At this point, Migla could have already been struck by Moog, so perhaps she was simply looking for him. She intentionally makes a beeline towards the south towards Kiplet, and Moog's palace is essentially underneath Stellian and underneath the area where Radon and Melania fought. So, Melania had some intel her a search for Migla, but again, this is speculation. But my favorite theory is the 4th one, which is that Melania, and by extension Migla, may have wanted Radon dead for the same reason that Rani eventually does, so that the stars resume them, bringing certain fates back into play. You might be asking, but why would Mikola want the stars to resume their movement? Well, perhaps Mikola's own fate was locked in stasis. We do find the demigods and the Starlight Shard in Mikola's hideaway after all, and I feel like it should be concerning that his fate might have fallen like this. But the best answer, I think, is that Mikola wanted the stars back in motion so that the could properly eclipse the sun. This was a ritual that Mikola seemed to believe would revive Godwin the Golden, his brother, and we talk about this a lot more in this video, and I can definitely see how the stars being in stasis would prevent the moon from eclipsing the sun, so I really like this answer. But I'd love to hear your theories. Surely there's more than just these 4 options. But in the end, there's only really one answer that I'm confident in, and it's that we can't confidently say for sure why Melania fought Radahn. Not yet, anyway. But whatever the reason, it must have been a good one, because it was during this battle that Melania sacrificed everything.
Master program complete. Well, this one's
In Elden Ring's story trailers, we see this legendary fight play out. Cleanrod Knights finally arrive with Melania facing off against the Red Bay Knights and manage to plunge a ton of spears into Radahn during their clash. You can actually see these spears still sticking out of his back to this day. Then Melania and Radahn are intermediate with 2 left standing. Melania sacrifices her prosthetic arm to get close to Radahn, grabbing her blade and plunging it into both of them, giving us a close-up view of the 2 characters. Here, Radahn looks monstrous, which I theorize could again be because he's tainted with madness and brute, though that's just speculation. And we can also see Melania's lips move here, muttering some final words, or perhaps incantation for the Scarlet Aeonia, which envelops herself and Radahn, putting an end to their fight. In this video's first part, we talked extensively about Melania's battle against the Scarlet Rot within her, but in this moment, she seems to lose that fight, maybe intentionally, and she allows the Scarlet Rot to take hold. Millicent, who is a great parallel to Melania, says that this is when she sacrificed her dignity, her sense of self, her will, and her pride. Melania did all of this just so that she could meet Radahn's measure. Thus did the Scarlet Rot explode outwards, infecting Radahn and the very land itself, as their battle came to a horrific standstill. In the end, neither party was in a state to continue fighting, so technically Melania didn't lose, so she was technically still undefeated. Few survived the Battle of Aeonia, but one who did was the Cleanrod Knight Finland. In an unimaginable act of heroism, carrying the slumbering form of Melania all the way back to the Haligtree. They managed this alone, fending off all manner of foes along the way. But back at the center of Caelid, Melania's Scarlet remained. A nearby phantom's dialogue reads, "Sublime, I tell you, the very first flower of Aeonia bloomed on this very spot. Melania, may you blossom into a goddess." In the present day, Caelid features in its center a giant tree that spirals in a similar manner to Melania's first Scarlet Bloom, so it probably is the same Scarlet Bloom. As the Phantom says, this was the very first flower of Aeonia, and the beginning of the Scarlet Swamp in this land. And at the very center of that is another curious thing. There's a boss called Commander O'Neill, who carries the Commander's standard, which reads, "Even after his lord was fled, Commander O'Neill continued to brandish this flag in the devastation of the rot-eaten field of battle. The sole veteran remembers this battle with pride." And it's hard for me to say exactly whose side O'Neill would have known. He summons the spirits of exiled soldiers who themselves have no real affiliation to speak of, though I will say that you can summon one of Millicent's sisters to help in the fight against O'Neill, which might suggest that he's opposed to the idea of rot and that he might have fallen for Radahn, although I feel like you can go both ways with this, because the standard says that his lord was fled, and both Melania and Radahn fled this battle. Anyway, when you defeat O'Neill by putting him into the diocese of Scarlet Red, because it's funny, he doesn't just drop the commander's standard, he also drops an heir of the Battle of Aeonia, a broken needle of unalloyed gold that was once buried within Melania's own flesh, repelling her scarlet rot until it snapped. Really interesting question here, considering the needle is broken, is whether Melania snapped the needle intentionally when she plunged her blade into herself and perhaps she knew that it would cause the rot within her to flare up worse than ever if the needle was broken and allow her to defeat Radahn. Millicent does explain that the explosion of rot in her is worse after she takes out the needle, almost as if it's building up inside. Stuff.
I didn't even tell you, but I took the needle myself. Worse than ever.
So it's pretty clear that this is where the final moments of the battle took place, and we can find clean knights able to rise outside when you're near Ulther now. But then, we don't find Radahn anywhere near here. Instead, we find him closer to his former home at Redmain Castle. In a nearby catacomb, the spirits of the dead actually continue to clash, refusing to surrender, even in death. And outside, Radahn is exactly the same way. And while witless, he's still alive, even managing to keep the stars in stasis. Even now, he's still in possession of his great rune, which itself started to burn to resist the encroachment of the Scarlet Moon. His feet have rotten off, the smears of clean rot knights remain in his flesh, but he fights on, simply using those spears in his back as arrows to fight off anyone who threatens him, refusing to give up and to die in anything but an honorable death. As the road takes hold, Merlin becomes a fresh hell, and the land itself becomes a threat. Even the dragons in this place were forced to flee, and they would make their new nest on a plateau that would be dug and dried again. And no one since then has dared to enter it. That said, a few dragons did not make it away unscathed. The dragon Exekis succumbed to the Scarlet Moon, though he did not forget his hatred, and sadly, Grail, the mother of all dragons, dwarves as well, can be found on death's door, surrounded by her children, and completely blighted by Scarlet Moon. Kind of sad. Thanks for the 50 minutes, though. Didn't that was Melania's Scarlet Rot, not really Melania herself, that would eventually drive Radahn's red knights to defeat, according to their armor. When they were driven to defeat by Melania's Scarlet Rot, red knights burned off the vest on the left breast of their armor to indicate the resolve, stating, "Alas, dear home, I shan't escape again, for our duty is to remain here, a movement against the light." The knights used fire to burn away their own quest in this way is such a great symbol, for fire was their one and only weapon for fighting back against the rot. And interestingly, according to the armorer's cookbook, a lot of these tools and techniques to build fire were passed down by an armorer who served to General Radahn, as his books contain knowledge of dealing with rot, the application of fire in particular. And so, this flame of the realm is clearly a large part of their identity henceforth. Corpses of rabid wildlife were piled high and burned along smouldering walls of flame were built in order to prevent the rot from spreading to neighboring lands of these same walls. There were
Right.
they burned down churches, and they managed to commandeer some flame chariots to help in their fight. Utilize torches, fireboats, and those, everything. Like Knight Gerard's mother saw a flamberge became the symbol of the castle itself, thanks to the flame-like undulation that gives this sword its difficult to pronounce name. Gerard himself remained at Redmayne Castle to regularly host a celebration of war, calling champions from far and wide to deliver death for his friend, who is now festering with rot and haunted by madness, and now only wishes for an honorable way out. Meanwhile, amidst Melania's Aeonian butterflies, pale mists emerge from the swamp of Aeonia. And though they appear to be mere bugs, not, these creatures are intelligent, with a quote-unquote keen intellect that allows them to craft unlimited weaponry from sharpened shell. And they can encant spells as well, and even take wild beasts. That said, they are ultimately creatures of worship, and Gowrie actually calls them ruthless, which admittedly does contrast with them being described as intelligent in this item description. Regardless, the beasts are also called the abandoned children of the goddess, servants of the goddess of rot, who have been forsaken, and it's not hard to see why. Not only was Melania carried far away at the very moment of her bloom when these pests allegedly emerged,
Fuck!
she resents and resists the scarlet rot inside her unless she's pushed to the absolute brink. So, of course, these pests are abandoned in that sense as well, and who wouldn't hate them? Honestly, is there anything more annoying than this bloody attack? Nevertheless, the pests persist. They even have a quotable line of dialogue in Kindred of Rot's Exaltation Talisman, which reads, "Rot for the Scarlet Goddess. O scarlet blossoms flourish in distant lands, and return to us, wanted children." Which brings us to the phrase, scarlet blossoms. This might be talking about literal flower buds of the scarlet rot, but instead I think it's talking about actual people. I think it's talking about five sisters. I think these are the scarlet blossoms. They are Liliana, Maureen, Amy, Mary, and Millicent. Oh, so she is what is that book? Before such a quality. She might have went around nine her sisters. So it seems like these pests, including Gowrie perhaps, have a keen interest in cultivating these scarlet blossoms. I prefer to talk about Millicent's questline in a prior episode, so subscribe and turn on notifications, but I will hold off now. But essentially, Gowrie does all of this in anticipation of these daughters becoming Scarlet Valkyries, who he believes might one day serve Melania when she ascends as the goddess. At this point, Melania hadn't been seen for a long while, not since she was carried off to the Hailing Tree, and the Hailing Tree's location itself was a mystery to many. But there were still those who found and worshipped her, and they weren't all pests. Some of them were human, like Malie Marai, Stellan of the Shaded Castle. Malie wears the Marai mask, which is something only worn by the head of House Marai. It bears the likeness of the first of their line and describes this long dual history of the Marai family, who served as both executioners and castellans of the Shaded Castle. So fittingly, their storied sword is the Marais sword, a wood-bladed weapon that would eventually be used against them. For one day, they made the mistake of capturing bell-bearing hunter named Elima. But Elima, who knew battle skills that allowed him to move objects with his very own will, snatched the sword from the site of his looming execution.
Fuck!
risk factors. But it doesn't seem like he wanted to rule over the castle in their stead. Instead, the castle falls into ruin, and when we find him, Eleanor is just standing and staring at an enormous portrait, which is a picture of Melania, which some believe is to blame for the fate of the castle. The nearby phantom laments the state of things and states House Marais is ruined, just deserts for falling for that severed army. No surprise that guilty cretin took the castle and our stories. In the outskirts of the castle, you can actually find and fight Marais, the former castellan of the castle who has now been ousted. He wields the hand spur rapier, which is a weapon that evokes the scorpion dagger that we mentioned at the start of the video, as it's also a blade fashioned from a chitinous creature. In this case, it's the spur of a giant ant. Fittingly then, its description reminds us that Scarlet Rot is an old legend, and it goes on to state that Marais of the Shaded Castle was a private believer in the Scarlet Rot, and indeed, he eventually found his own personal goddess. The Marais Road explains why he was so enamored with her, stating that the sons of House Marais are all sickly born, and so Marais was regarded by the mythical goddess in the world. Melania was on the whole powerful and is bigger in spite of her affliction, so it's easy to see why Marais looked up to her. Though I guess it's possible that he took this beverage too far, as the castle is found in the poison swamp, and further growth is filled with prosthetics, which would grow Melania's mother. Indeed, it's possible that he even found Melania's window prosthetic as you looked in Valkyrie's prosthesis, with rings and golden prosthesis once used by one of help to work. With practice and skill, they could be used as proficiently as when Marais, Lord of the Shaded Castle, embraced this prosthesis, he claims to feel the presence of this. Now, I'm not really sure if this is Melania's actual prosthesis. I feel like it makes this war against that, but regardless, it drives home just how much of a fanboy this guy was. And in the end, the castle is not much more now than just a hope for some surviving Negro minds who would understandably feel at home in such a place. And I guess they have nowhere else to go as Melania slumbers back in the Haley, where she does very little else until and to trigger what I think is her second transformation.
Scarlet, that was once you witnessed your power.
Now, some good news for you this chapter. So, you know how difficult Melania was to defeat, right? But what if I told you that wasn't her final form? It might not be. Scarlet Aeonia description reads, each time the scarlet flower blooms, Melania's rot advances, and with the third bloom, she will become a true goddess. So, it's known that Melania's first bloom was in Caitlin, and we know that she blooms in a fight against us, so the debate becomes, is this mid-fight Melania's second bloom, or her third? Some would argue that this is Melania's third bloom, and that she's already become the goddess of rot. She does, after all, literally have goddess of rot as her title, and there is a bloom right outside her boss room, which could have been the site of her second bloom.
Oh,
So
yeah.
let's argue against that. Well, for starters, the bloom outside might not be hers. For one, it'd be kind of weird if she had a second bloom that is never described right here when she's slumbering in just the neighboring. But not only that, in front of this bloom, you actually loot the Traveler's set, which is the same set worn by Millicent and her sisters, and Melanie as well. Considering Millicent and her sisters are buds of Melania, and considering Millicent also leaves behind one of these blooms when she dies, it's ridiculous to think that one of these sisters might have flowered here already. I don't think that Melania having Goddess of Rot in her boss title means that much. Many, like Gowrie and the Pests, already believe that Melania is the Goddess of Rot. The Scarlet Aeonia description instead specifies that the third bloom will her a true goddess. And
Motherfucker.
anything before that is just a brief flash of the Rot God shining through. The biggest piece of evidence that Melania hasn't yet reached her third bloom yet, in my opinion, comes from Gowrie, who goes to extraordinary lengths to nurture Millicent, encouraging us to kill her even, just so this betrayal can turn her into a Scarlet Valkyrie that will serve Melania.
It must be done by your hand. No other. Millicent, still rather deeply offended. Sever that trust, and by betrayal her own flower most. When Melania ascends to godhood, Millicent's temple shall be granted. It's a scarlet value.
If Millicent dies, she flowers, with Gowrie's expectation being that she will be revived after this. So considering that there's a bloom in Melania's boss room as well, and if she's after her, I feel like it's possible that Melania could have another revivification after this as well. And one final piece of evidence was actually pointed out by you guys in the comments of my recent Oracle short. In that video, I argued that the Oracles might be there to herald the return of Nicola as a god, as their spirit ashes state that it is that when Oracle envoys appear playing their pipes, they do so to herald the arrival
Fuck!
of age. But I completely neglected to mention that they might be here to herald Melania's ascension as a god instead. So, thank you guys for pointing that out. If you haven't already, I'd appreciate it if you tried out some of my shorts content. It's extremely difficult to fit everything within 60 seconds, but it's a fun challenge, and I'm pretty happy with some of the short stories that I've been able to tell in those shorts. Anyway, personally, I wouldn't be surprised if we find some incarnation of Melania again in the DLC, and I'd be down for that fight, provided she rises again with her lower half as a scorpion or something. But what I find to be the most disturbing thought about Melania's potential third is that Gowrie believes a Scarlet Bloom will be more vivid if it's nurtured by betrayal. That's what we see in Millicent's questline. So what if Melania's third bloom would be more vivid if she's betrayed by her brother, Nicola? But it's late now, and I'm really getting into some deranged speculation territory, aren't I? So that's probably my cue to end the video. A special thanks to Miss Pat for the footage and editing help, as always, and special thanks to Quaylark as well for going over this script. And thank you, as always, for watching.
Huh. Oh yeah. Oh.
Interviewing Rana aka Menran. First and foremost, why nerd?
Because I never even knew what nerdcore was for the time that I was. We'll kind of talk about some more true to life and nerdy topics and over some hit beats. I was always a big fan of the sound, Mega Man and Mario, stuff like that. So I decided to combine, the love for the games with the love for hip hop and put it together and see what
Nice. Friends, else. What was a good place to farm this damn thing? I don't remember. I think maybe the water was?
Many of Elden Ring's bosses serve Baron using Alten Order in some shape or form, whether they're loyal to it or enslaved by it. So let's discuss all of these bosses, starting at a time before Order had even come to the lands between. To to the north are mountaintops of the giants, a name that makes it abundantly clear just who dominated this region of the world. However, it was not always this way. According to the Borealis' mist incantation, the ice dragons were once to the mountaintops long enough until they were defeated by the fire giants and chased. And perched upon this peak stands an enormous forge. Interestingly, the chain rings this forge depicts dragons, which might be a reference to the dragons that once dwelt here. And while I don't think we can say for sure who built this forge, the art of smithing is said to have originated among the giants, and the craft was even once considered divine. So it seems likely that at the very least they made good use of this fire. Sparks from this forge would fall down and fertilize the smoldering flowers that bloomed upon the mountaintops, and it seems like it was a pretty crucial part of life in this region. The most ancient giants here were called fire giants, and according to the Burn O' Flame incantation, they have long held a solitary curse to serve as keepers of the flame for eternity. Now, traditionally in From Software games, curses are the domain of the gods, and indeed, the fire giants are cited to have borrowed power from one such god, who is represented here by a single large red eye. This god is called a god of flame, and it's believed to be able to inhabit fire itself, as well as the bodies of the fire giants worshipped. The giants shared borders with the astrologers, who, according to their legendary Sword of Night and Flame, established themselves in the mountaintops and considered the fire giants their neighbors. The relationship here is implied to be friendly, even collaborative, maybe, as the sword does combine the power of both flame and the power of primeval current that's glimpsed within the night sky. The sword would go on to become a treasure of the Carrion royal family, and the Carrions themselves are likely descendants of the astrologers. Generations later, these Carrion royals would fall upon their old giant allies Fae, but we'll get to that in a moment. The fire giants also had another neighbor, with whom relations were not so amicable. Further down the mountains, just past the Forbidden Lands, roamed the Knights of Zamor. According to their armor, these long-lived warriors, clad in biting, freezing winds, are said to have been the mortal enemies of the fire giants since time immemorial. According to their weaponry, these beings were devoted to winter itself, and had weapons styled after icy winds and bodies that were cloaked in swirling ice storms. It makes good sense that such cold beings would be natural mortal enemies of the fire giants, and they commonly did challenge their larger rivals. But it seems like their true chance came when Queen Marika waged war against the fire giants, and the Knights of Zamor gladly joined her offensive. They earned great renown amongst the Order of the Erd Tree, and many ancient heroes of Zamor became hailed as heroes, as the fire giants were largely wiped from the face of the earth after this war. Now, up until now, I've resisted calling the giants evil, but the reality is that in pretty much every item description, their god is described as a fell god, and the giant's flame is a flame of ruin. And to be fair, their god doesn't seem like a super nice guy. I mean, it only really opens its eye when the fire giant boss sacrifices a leg, which is pretty metal. But I'm sort of giving them the benefit of the doubt because I think it's pretty clear who's writing the history about this fell god here. Many mentions of this god as evil clearly come about because fire itself was just this extremely taboo topic during this age of the Erd Tree. It's not just Giant's Flame items that mention this. Fire in general was forbidden to those who served the Erd Tree, which is a smart defensive measure, especially considering that many rival outer gods also have a flame of their own. Formless Mother has Blood Flame, the Three Fingers have Frenzied Flame, the outer god of death has Ghost Flame, but Giant's Flame in particular was capable of burning the Erd Tree, and that is a fact that clearly inspired the inevitable war with the Giants. So the Giants were deemed mortal enemies of the Erd, and they allegedly isolated nature, triggered avalanches, and whipped up storms of flame with their roars. Clearly those who served the Erd Tree were afraid. perhaps rightfully so. And so, led by Lord Godfrey, forces of the infantry went to war. The fire giants borrowed from the power of the Felbone to fight against the infantry, but were defeated nonetheless. According to the Burn, flame incantation is released fire giants from their curse to serve as keepers of the flame, all except one, who the Felbone still hides within. Upon realizing that the giant's flame would never die, Marika left this last giant alive, knowing it was bound to protect the flame from eternity, and thus leaving it cursed to protect the flame from those like us. In addition to the Knights of Spawn, many lesser giants were also roped into war against the fire giants. These lesser giants are called trolls, and are confirmed to be a race that is descended from the knights. This relationship is clearer at the mountaintops, where the trolls here still cast giants' flame incantations. Troll hammers were even once used as ancient ceremonial smithing tools. Thus it seems evident that the trolls and the fire giants coexisted for a moment, and then fell further and further. Because while some trolls are assumedly still fire giants at heart, many now are not. In fact, at the heart of most trolls is nothing. There's this suspicious hollow here, almost as if something has been ripped out of their torso. And when you consider what's upon the torso of the last remaining fire giant, the truth becomes pretty clear, right? Every single troll is now missing that giant eye of their outer god. And if you manage to look really closely here at a troll, we realize that in its place is this strange stone tablet that is held in place by what look like roots. As pointed out by Quaylard, these rooted tablets are very reminiscent of the rooted shackles that were created to bind the Urban Winds, Moog and Morgoth, which might suggest that the trolls are also being shackled or suppressed by Marika in some way. This is just speculation, of course, but Marika does have this suspicious set of stone tablets in her chambers, and I think it's a good theory for sure. A small gravestone in the mountaintops elaborates further on the troll's role in the War of the Giants. Here, champions battle, and allegedly the trolls betray. What was the nature of this betrayal? Did these lesser giants resent their larger kin? Or did Marika force this betrayal in some way with the stone shackles? I think that's largely up to you guys. But whatever the case, nowadays the trolls are said to have lost their minds and are inseparable from the weight of their rusty swords, which have long since lost any trace of gold. Whether they carry coffins or lie down in bedrock of the earth, their sad state brings to mind enslavement now more than anything else. That said, some trolls do seem to have a little bit more dignity, and it's the ones that fought against later on. These were the enchanted troll knights, deemed comrades of the young Renala, and they were called to service when the Queen invoked an oath and swore long ago. As mentioned earlier, trolls go way back to when the fire giants and the astrologers were still names, and back then it seems, for whatever reason, this to the astrologers. And later, when the Carians went to war against the Erdtree, I assume, the trolls were finally called into their service to be treated as troops. Wielding swords embedded with blue glintstone and summoning enormous glint blades, they fought arm in arm with their long-past humans. E.G. is another such example of that relationship, by the way. The Carian families of royal blacksmith. Unlike the stone digger trolls, he actually uses that weapon for its intended purpose as blacksmith's mother. And now he serves the Lady Rani, who he's known ever since her home. Next, I want to talk about the Knights Cavalry. These recurring bosses wander in roads at night, and once led by the Felbone. This description specifically references Margaret's title as the Felbone, not Morgoth's title as the Urban King. And I think this is important because Margaret represents this undercover extension of Morgoth, scouts further out in the world and takes out champions who are prone all the way from Stormvale Castle foremost, all in the story is that he's a stout defender of the tree who wouldn't dare betray Golden Order. He calls all the other gods willful traitors, including fighting over great runes of the Elden Ring. Even Radahn, who has a lot of signs of being quite loyal to the Golden Order, is simply because he fights at one stage another character as a great rune. You can see Morgoth in one of these opening cutscene cinematics leap not what looks like Radahn, and managing to even get an attack off on one of the mightiest of demigods. Actually, the channel name Slowtown has a really good little video discussing whether this is indeed Radahn. I highly recommend go and check that out. Anyway, my point is, Knights Cavalry seem to fulfill a similar role to Goliath. According to their armor, they were deliverers of death, being warriors, knights, and champions. Simple as no motive is listed except that they have a reputation for taking out these warriors of the world. And that makes sense that that would be their aim, because only the strongest are required to druids and approach the earth tree. So it's almost as if strength must stifle, so Morgoth's only point might be. As for why Margit defends Stormfang, I like to think that he's fighting here because he recognizes that Godric is the weakness of the demigods, yet remains. So he's also in that sense, trying to maintain this unsteady stalemate. Nothing strong that's essentially the guiding principle of those who serve the earth. Essentially, as you get closer to the capital, first examples of this, the soldiers of Leyndell fight their battles defensively. Knights of Leyndell always put their shield before the sword, and Leyndell itself, the city, is built to withstand siege with layers and layers of defensive barriers, and the protected stand to which all defenders of the earth tree is that of the tree sentinels, whose order living rampart of the earth, embellished with golden tree-crested armor and shields that can retaliate with moments of light. They turn defense into offense, and that's the idea in Leyndell. Defense is the best offense, and the way this idea is presented is just such beautiful storytelling. So, as in barrenness of the land between longing to return to the blessed land of the tree, and even view as this goal that looms over you the entire game. So, it's designed to repel everyone getting close. If the highway through Leonia has fallen apart, so you need to take this secret waterlogged route up through the mountain. This is my favorite part of the game, by the way, finding this secret path through the mountains, infiltrating down this plateau. And then when you finally get there are countless blister and golem arches in position facing outwards. And finally, you need to find a side entrance to Leyndell, and that is even guarded by a tree sentinel. It's not just any tree sentinel. This one is actually a draconic tree sentinel, which is kind of different. This variant of sentinels removes after the ancient dragons attacked Leyndell in its history. And we talk more about this event in the video about the demigods, but in the end, the ancient dragons were befriended, and worship of the ancient dragons was deemed acceptable, alongside belief in Yod. The dragons were joined with the Golden Order, so to speak, and the dragon cultists took art in a physical fashion. Also, instrumental to the rise of the Earth Ring were the crucibles. They were eventually spawned for their strength, appearance, and for their close resemblance to chaos, how that inspired who they originally were. 16 of these knights served Godric first on the Lord, and all 16 of them yet remain across the lands between. One is imprisoned in Neverjail, two appear to be dead and are summoned to fight you as spirits. A number of Crucible Knights still rolling down, some protect Tree roots, though most just stand dejected in lost corners of the earth. One of them is even found in new blasphemous bastards. The next time you fight these, think carefully about where they are and who they're fighting with, because each knight is distinct with purpose, like their own, even though they were all once united by a common purpose and a single goal. Many of these knights fight with different aspects of the Crucible, Some fight with wings, some with horns, fire, and tail. What they all have in common is their mastery of their Lord Godfrey's signature stomp attack, which breaks up the earth beneath their feet. This is such a cool homage to Godfrey. Knowing the Lord is it definitely makes dying to it feel a little bit better, right? Anyway, I think it's important to remember that Godfrey and his Crucible Knights existed in an age before Earthbreaks, an age with the Great Tree in its primordial form, back when there was this red-tinted crucible of life. These warriors drew power from its flames. Eventually, however, they were brought on board with order, which is best exemplified by Godfrey being tamed by the Beast Regent upon his back. There are two types of ornamentation that the Crucible Knights have. There's axe ornamentation, which is worn by Crucible Knight Doris and his men, and I think the axe is a bit of an homage to Godfrey again. And then there are some knights that have Great Tree ornamentation, and these are displayed by the Knight Saluri per men, which is of course a reference to Book 3 itself. I'd like to quickly talk about Great Tree. In one of my first lore videos, I proposed that there was a Great Tree that must have existed before the Erd Tree, and that the Erd Tree might have even replaced this Great Tree. This was based on English resin item description, which has the word tree capitalized, and there's one word which certainly makes you think.
What the fuck?
The line is, the roots of the Great Tree once linked to those of the Erd Tree, which is a line that seems
Oh
to
my
be
God.
separate trees. Except the Japanese translation doesn't say that. The Japanese translation says, these roots are said to have once been connected to the Golden Tree. It does mention the Great Tree earlier, but it seems to just be referencing the Erd as that Great Tree, because it is the big tree. Some people have taken this to mean that there was a Great Tree before the Erd Tree, and you know, while that's certainly possible, I think it's still fair to argue that a Great Tree existed before the Erd Tree. Many of the Crucible Knight items reference a primordial form of the Erd Tree, and they have ornamentation and history that is based on this primordial holiness that is not the holiness of the Erd. So calling it a Great Tree might just be referencing that tree. And secondly, Saluri defends a giant tree in the deep root depths. It's one that has this hollowed out entrance that is reminiscent of the entrance of the Erd Tree as well. So maybe there's something here. I just kind of wanted to set that straight. The reality is that we don't really know. And hopefully DLC will shed a light on some of these past ages of the world, which seems to be a common trend with From Software DLC. And there just really are so many remnants of previous ages in this game, and I'd love to see a little bit more about what their cultures really were like. And it makes you resent just how all-encompassing the Erd Tree became. So many of these cultures have been lost, and I guess that's how a lot of characters in game feel as well. They feel upset by that. Knowing this helps you understand why so many of these characters are okay with burning down the Erd Tree. Totally fine with that. And this brings us to our next one, because in the act of burning down the Erd Tree, you release a slew of ulcerated root spirits from these spirits lie suffering beneath the ash until you come along. But of course, you fight many of these root spirits across the lands between you and Ford. There's an ulcerated root spirit in the husk of this minor Erd Tree, lunch in catacomb dungeons, Erd Tree roots. There's even one at the husk of the Hailing Tree. There's a lot of things. Some might even say there's too many instances. I think it's but anyway, understanding their lore might make it a bit more palatable. So, while these creatures fight near the trees, I don't think they're defending them. Rather, I kind of think they're surrounded by dead, dying trees. You know that one of the new purposes of the Erd Tree is to accept spirits and allow them to live on. It's almost like these ulcerated spirits are this horrific veil of that process. One of Miyazaki's favorite themes in these games is the idea that life is not supposed to be eternal, and I think these spirits are a physical manifestation of stagnation and decay. They're this concept of an age of an Erd Tree that really should have ended a long time ago. Most tree spirits from golden seeds, which are also found in the base of the trees. They read, When the Elden Ring was shattered, these seeds flew from the Erd Tree, scattering across the various lands, as if life itself knew that its end had come. The talisman also goes on to say, the Erd Tree was once perfect in turn, and thus it was believed that Erd Tree seeds could not exist. This was back when there was an age of plenty, when blessings literally dripped the boughs of the Erd Tree like sap. And the Erd Tree's warm light healed those who bathed in its rays. The Erd Tree flourished with abundance, yet it was only for a fleeting moment. That is the course for all humanity. Then the leaves began to fall. As you know from the introduction, the endings, fallen leaves tell us. The story is that the Erd Tree is withering. Scattered across the lands between are minor Erd Trees, where you go to collect crystal tears. Basins were placed at the feet of minor Erd Trees in order to collect these tears, though in some cases these tears are dropped by Erd Tree avatars instead. When the Elden Ring was shattered, the avatars emerged, wielding ceremonial staffs that depict the Erd Tree in its historic radiance. These creatures are the will, the dying Erd Tree, made manifest, I think. They are literally part-free, after all, and they fight desperately to protect the minor Erd Trees, which are the offspring of the withering Erd itself. Some avatars placed in Caleb and Mikla's Haley Tree are rotten avatars, and they even have this uniquely designed staff that festers with rot, just as they do. Remember that Haley is also an emulation of the Erd Tree, so it makes sense that it has its own avatars as well. And they fight on, because to many of these creatures, any Erd Tree, whether it's minor, copy, duped, is something protected. So, if we've made it all the way to the end of this video, then chances are you love this kind of long-form content. So, just sign up at .com/video.
Oh, what the fuck?
Text video to 500, and you'll get a free credit for the first month, and then again for every paid month.
Bruh.
This time, I'd recommend you spend that credit on the Sandman, which might be just one of the most unique audiobooks you've ever listened to. It has its own cast of voice actors, including author Neil Gaiman himself, who narrates, as well as sound effects, music. It's an incredible introduction to the story that a lot of people are talking about right now. Have a listen, see what I mean.
The year was 1960. Roderick Burgess conceived a plan in high power when adventure came. Did Burgess know what he had got? Capture the death of adventures.
So, if you'd like access to this or to thousands of other audiobooks and podcasts, then visit audible.com/VartyVideo or text VartyVideo to 500. Thank you to Audible for sponsoring this video, and thank you for watching.
lies ahead.
You know, after death, what is the right way to die? Can death be overcome? And if it can, what are the consequences of such a thing? These questions are at the very heart of Elden Ring's story, and in order to answer them, I want to go over a set of bosses that are defined by their relationship to death, those being the Death Birds, the Ancestral Swords, the Tibia Maridus, the Godskins, the Burial Watchdogs, and the Black Knife Assassins. Understanding these bosses will teach you so much. In Elden Ring, oneself is separated into two distinct entities. There's the body, which is one's physical self or corporeal flesh. Then there's the spirit, which is essentially the soul that commonly persists after death. In the age of the Erd Tree, the bodies of the dead and their spirits are returned to the earth. This is done via a process called Erd Tree Burial, where great roots in catacomb dungeons absorb the dead so that they might be immortalized with the earth. But it was not always this way. In fact, the entire culture of death had a different shape in the earlier days of the Lands Between. Back then, instead of Erd Tree Burial, death commonly burned in ghost flame. Ghost flame, also known as spirit flame, is a cold, white flame that is created when bones are burned to ash. We learn this from the fallen orcs who prowl the underground rivers. When the last embers of their torches were used up, they were forced to burn the bones of their fellows instead, and acquired the cold ghost flame. This process appears to help separate the spirit from the body. And while a lot of these spirits appear to be vengeful based on the ghost flame spells, I think in general, having the body separated from the spirit in this way would have been a desired outcome. I speculate that we'll see proof of this even in the current age, where the wandering dead at Aegil Lake gaze at the sky, praying that the dragon Aegil might burn them to ash. Perhaps this was simply the acceptable way to put a tired body to rest. The keepers of Ghost Flame were the Death Birds, who tended to the flame in their graveyards, raking out the ashen remains of the dead from their kilns. So I like to think of the Death Birds as serving the old process of death, and delivering death by reducing bodies to ash, so that spirits might be better able to move on. Now, admittedly, a lot of these spirits are vengeful, and that's how Ghost Flame is sort of weaponized by the Death Birds and sorcerers. But I do think that at its core, Ghost Flame was important just because it separated the body and the spirit. After all, the explosive Ghost Flame sorcery compares this process of death to the Erd Tree's process of death, which was pretty all-encompassing. So I think it's safe to assume that Ghost Flame was just really important to the process of death, and it was more than just, vengeful spirits and a weapon to be used. And next we should talk about the Twin Bird, which was the mother of the Death Birds. We don't find this creature in the game, but we can find its likeness painted vividly upon a kite shield that one of the Death Birds drops. The design might remind you of a phoenix, which is traditionally drawn with white colours and a crest of feathers and a longish neck. Of course, the phoenix is a creature that rises from the ash when it dies, which is obviously extremely fitting for this. So the kite shield tells us that the Twin Bird, or this phoenix creature, is said to be the mother of the Death Birds. But not only that, it's also called the envoy of an outer god. So we can kind of compare the Twin Bird to two fingers, then, who are also envoys to an outer god. They are envoys to the greater will, and similarly, I assume the Twin Bird communes with some outer god of death. And while we're definitely left wondering what greater purpose this outer god might have, the mere fact that it exists lends a lot of significance to the Twin Bird and its Death Birds as well. A variation on the Death Bird is the Death Right Bird, which is an alternate boss, and it's a far more threatening foe, as it actually seems to use power that it's gained from certain spirits and Ghost Flame. And if you look closely at its ethereal wings, you might even spy little spirits lurking within. And when I saw these, I was really excited because I recognized the weapon they're using, and the weapon explains who they are. they're holding a little death ritual spear, and that item reads, "Priests became the guardians of the birds through the rite of death, which is a part of their contract for a far-off resurrection." So deathbirds have a lot to do with sacrificial rites. They don't just tend to the ghost flame, they also deliver death, and they also perform rites of death. So we can assume that these priests were sacrificed in a rite of death so that they could lend a sort of spiritual strength to the deathbirds. But we're still left wondering about the nature of their contract with the deathbirds, which promises a far-off resurrection for them. What agreement did these priests come to with the deathbirds? Wonder what has to happen for their contract to be fulfilled, and how would they even resurrected? In terms of where the deathbirds appear, they kind of appear everywhere, and I think that might be a hint that their influence was once present far and wide. And while their importance in the current age is likely quite diminished, they still definitely are relevant in the lands between. In fact, many other enemies actually make reference to them, and some even successfully channel their powers. And Ghost Flame lights the way in Catacomb dungeons to this day. But in general, there is a lot of power that can be gained from death in the lands between, which brings us to the ancestral spirit. In the flourishing landscapes underneath the lands between, you would have found the bodies of 3 large stags enshrined by the ancestral followers. These warriors, hunters, and shamans believe heavily in the principle that life sprouts from birth, but also from death. I think this principle is sort of represented by horns, because in real life, horns continue to grow throughout the lifespans of animals, with their primary function usually being to convey a social hierarchy. And here, the largest and most influential creature is a giant stag. And in the world of Elden Ring, since life continues after death, it makes sense then that this creature's antlers continue to bud and grow even after its death. We learn this from defeating the ancestor spirit and looking at the horn of this fallen king. New growth spun, glowing with light. Thus does new life grow from death, and from death one obtains power. Long-lived beasts like this are worshipped by the ancestral followers, a race of beings who keep their distance from the earth tree and just content to await buds and new growth. If a being does not show signs of budding horns or new growth, then they are sacrificed with an axe called the Winged Greathorn. Interestingly, the twin blades of this sacrificial axe are called Envoy's Wings, which might be a reference to the twin bird we mentioned earlier, which was also a winged envoy. According to the Horn Charm talismans, the ancestral spirits specifically arise from long-lived beasts, and I think this touches on another commonly repeated theme in Elden Ring, which is that there are benefits to living life to its fullest potential. To quote some more Deathbird items, the most glorious end awaits those who cling tenaciously to life, and it is important to render up death worth offering. Those who lived a heroic life were even able to go on and see a unique version of grace in the afterlife. I currently think that this grace is red, and that these are the same red rings of grace that you might have noticed when you first explored the Forbidden Lands. So this might be the most intriguing part of the video. Let me explain. Past the Forbidden Lands, and deep within the consecrated snowfields, is a Tibia Mariner, and this one drops Helford Steeple, a greatsword that reveals just a mind-blowing amount of them for one item. First, it reads, "Greatsword patterned after the black steeple of the Helford, the lamp which guides the dead of the spirit world." So the word steeple is commonly used to describe the tall spire found on churches, and indeed the design of Helford's steeple echoes that of the Moriah blade from Dark Souls, which also reference the spire of the church. However, while I think Helford is likely to be a sort of church, I don't think it's a building. Instead, this item seems to be describing the shape of a black tree in the spirit world, the so-called lampwood or lamplight tree that serves as a guidepost for the heroic dead. The item goes on to say that lamplight is similar to bricks in appearance, and it is said that it can only be seen by heroic spirits or those who met their death in battle. So the black tree of Helford is almost like this dark mirror of the Erd tree, but in the spirit world. It's so interesting that it even gives off its own guidance of grace, and there's a few reasons we speculate that this grace might be red. First, a red gem can be found at the very tip of Helfen's steeple, and a gem on the rolled medallion as well. Plus, there's a red glow visible from the source gem, and a red glow from the rolled medallion when you hold it up at the Grand Lift, where it takes you to the Forbidden Lands. We speculate that you can briefly glimpse this lamplight, the red grace filtering between the trees. So you might be asking, why can we see the grace when we're not dead? But technically, tarnished are defined as the dead who yet live, so it might make some sense that we can see it. The next question is, where does the lamplight lead? I think there's two options. One is that the lamplight might lead back to Helfen itself. That is the source of the light after all, and Helfen's steeple can be wreathed in ghost flames, so maybe the dead are sort of put to rest here. Alternatively though, I guess it's also possible that the lamplight has plans for the heroic dead, just like Grace has plans for the tarnished. It might lead them somewhere else as well. We just don't know. In my discussions with Quayla, who helped with these theories, she points out the similarities that Helfen has with Valhalla of Nordic folklore. If you don't know, Valhalla is a place where brave spirits would be invited to dine with the gods. And it seems that Helfen is inspired by that same sort of folklore, since only heroic spirits can see the light. Not to mention that L, with one L, is actually the name of the world of the dead in Nordic folklore. And speaking of folklore, this finally brings us back to the Tibia Mariner, the boss that dropped Helfen's steeple in the first place. The Tibia Mariners themselves actually have no written lore to speak of, which is kind of a shame. What they do have is an incredible visual design, and it kind of carries them from a lore perspective, because this visual design is steeped very heavily in appropriate folklore. So, in Greek mythology, there is a stretch of water called the River Styx, which is the boundary between Earth and the underworld. And to help souls of the deceased cross this river, you have to find the river boatman and pay him to safely take you across. Just so, I kind of imagine the dead in Elden Ring are being drawn to the Tibia Mariner in a similar fashion. You know, he has a purple lantern and a loud horn, and he might offer a similar sort of guidance to the underworld. There's one spell that references this boss briefly. It's Tibia's Summons, and it says, "For time immemorial, the dead have been those who are lost and require guidance and leadership." Suffice to say, death was a very important facet of life in the Lands Between, even for the gods at one point. Which brings us to the Godskins, a horde of apostles that were born to deliver destined deaths to the gods long ago. I kind of like to think of them as counterbalancing force to the influence of gods, wielding sharp tools for boring, slicing through flesh, and implanting spells that mocked the wrath of the gods. It seems these Godskins actually succeeded in hunting many gods, if their name is to be believed. Their robes were made by sewing together patches of smooth skin, and the nobles' robes include subcutaneous fat, makes them plump and soft. Known for their seven-faced aprons, these nobles are the most ancient apostles, and they're deeply inhuman. Their weapon is not a slicer, but a stitcher, and they wield it with a skill that is unmatched by any lowborn. These beings were elevated to a social class above the lowborn because they served a queen, a glow-mind. The black flames they wield are actually channeled from that queen's greatsword, and it was this queen who raised them from birth in the first place, cradling her newborn apostles in godskin cloth, so that they might grow to become the death of the gods. This glow-mind queen was powerful, but what makes her character so important is that she was also an Empyrean, chosen by the Fingers. Now, remember, an Empyrean is a candidate chosen by the Two Fingers to become a god, so despite being such a dark character, the Glow-Mind Queen was still a valid choice for godhood. And all of this, of course, was before the Rune of Death had been removed from the Elden Ring, and it was from this Rune of Death that the Black Flame originally got its power. We only know of one other Empyrean alive at this time, and that was Queen Marika. Naturally, at some point, Marika and the Glow-Mind Queen clashed, though, according to the Godslayer Greatsword description, we know that the Glow-Mind Queen was defeated by Malekith, who was the shadow of Queen Marika. He is credited with defeating the Glow-Mind Queen and the Apostles, and sealing off the Rune of Death, which, again, was the source of their power. What's not clear to me about all of this, though, is whether Marika and the Glowmite Queen were rival Imperials competing for godhood, or if Marika was already a god and decided to take out the Glowmite Queen, because the Glowmite Queen was an Imperial threat to her age. But at any rate, it seems like Marika and the Glowmite Queen are opposites. You know, the Glowmite Queen ends ages, but Marika wished for an age eternal, so it makes sense that they'd clash. There's still so much we don't know about. But after all of this, Marika's Age of the Erd Tree began, and during this age, you were supposed to wait for the roots of the Erd Tree to call to you, so that your spirit would return to the Erd Tree after death to be immortalized with it. Specifically, these roots were found in catacomb dungeons, and there's even a statue found across the lands between that was designed to help people find these catacomb dungeons. This is the statue of Rosas, Usher of Death, and he shows the dead the path towards catacomb dungeons. The catacombs themselves were built in the Erd Tree. This is proven by root resin, which states that the roots here were once linked to the Erd Tree, and it was for this reason that catacombs were constructed around these great tree roots. So at this point in history, Queen Marika had implemented a new concept for death, lands between, and in her eyes, proper death meant returning to the Erd Tree. Thus, in the days where catacombs were connected to the Erd Tree, these catacombs were valid sites of Erd Tree burial, and I think we literally see this taking place as corpses can be seen being absorbed by the roots at the end of every catacomb dungeon. The process of Erd Tree burial, though, is described as an honor reserved for heroes, and this process of Erd Tree burial is presided over by Erd Tree burial watchdogs, who protect catacombs with their impish servants. These creatures are golems, and I think that they might have been created specifically during the period of history where Liurnia had an allegiance with Langdell, since they serve the process of Erd Tree burial, but their weapons actually have glintstone embedded in them. Furthermore, when hit by impure crystal darts, they malfunction, which I think is further proof of their glintstone functions. In some catacombs and graveyards, the physical bodies of the dead have begun. These beings are defined as those who live in death, and they are a relatively recent phenomenon in the 1920s. Instead of having their body and spirit return to the Erd Tree, they rise in an act that is completely at odds with Marika's concept of death, Erd Tree burial, and the Golden Order. We'll go into more detail on this later when we talk about Godwin, but basically, this all began when Rani stole a fragment of the Rune of Death from Malekith, and then she imparted its power onto the knives of the Black Knife Assassins. You can tell the Assassins have quite a lot of secrets in their lore. We do know a few things, though. We know that they're all women, they're all Numen, and they have links to Queen Marika and the Eternal City as well. We'll have to go into more detail on them later, though. But with their knives, with the Rune of Death, they carved a curse mark into two demigods, Rani and Godwin. The curse mark itself is an obtainable item, and it reads, "This curse mark was carved at the moment of death of the first demigod, and should have taken the shape of a circle. However, two demigods perished at the same time, breaking the curse mark into two half-wheels. Rani was the first of the demigods whose flesh perished, while the Prince of Death perished in soul alone." So, interestingly, these assassins and the knives imbued with the Rune of Death had the power to cleave life from the physical body and from the spirit as well. Specifically, Rani was the one whose flesh perished, and she became a disembodied spirit, free from her corporeal flesh, which is what she wanted, and she now occupies a doll. But Godwin became the Prince of Death, living without a soul, and spreading the Rune of Death across the lands between. Deathroot. Now, according to item descriptions, Deathroot is the Rune of Death itself, and it acts as a source that gives rise to those who live in death. Now, what I find really interesting is the fact that this Rune of Death that is embodied by Deathroot and those who live in death, it clearly has aspects of both death and life as well, which makes sense based on what you should have learned from this episode, right? Because death isn't just the end, it's life as well. So it makes sense that those who live in death would have aspects of death and life all contained in these beings that were brought to life, in a sense, by the Rune of Death. And while those who live in death are a bit unnatural because they do come from this fragmented womb of death, this hearth of curse mark, they still have life in death, and so you can argue that they still have a right to life. And in fact, that's entirely what one of the endings is about, at least how I understand it, and I'll try to explore it more thoroughly later on. These beings are persecuted and hunted down by fundamentalists of the Golden Order, and whether these fundamentalists are truly serving the fundamentals of order in the first place is just a topic that is very interesting to explore. So, in conclusion, maybe it shouldn't be a sin to live in death. After all, to quote Fia, in death there is only peace, for in death there can be no sensation. Thank you for watching. Special thanks to Quaylark for looking over this script. She has an awesome channel that you really should go and check out, and it's been great to have someone to just discuss my ideas with. But I'd also like to thank Eve, the sponsor of this video, who'd like me to talk about Spectrum, which is their high-end gaming monitor. Now, I got 99% of the sponsorship emails that Midland is many things. A fundamentalist, the unalloyed, creator of the healing, Lord of the Eclipse, Saint Trina, brave song, and not just a demigod, but has been captured, but is unresponsive for now. And after watching this video, I think you'll know that Nicola is a topic that almost has to explore further in some upcoming DLC. How could they not be? Their character is surely too major, too foreshadowed, and too intriguing to just ignore. So let's learn everything that there is to know. For starters, Nicola is the demigod child of Queen and King Sol Radigan, who, as I'm sure well aware at this point, are the same being. You can learn more about the timeline of events from our videos. But basically, after Radigan left Renala, the Academy told Radigan to go fuck himself, basically. But Radigan took that literally, and he sired a third set of demigod children, of his own, who were the twins Nicola and Melania. These children appear to be represented by the dragonfly items in the game, and the nascent butterfly appears to represent Nicola. Its description elaborates on the state of maternal childhood, stating that it appears as if it's just emerged from its entire life. Indeed, the word nascent means that something is just coming into existence, beginning to display signs of future potential, and that nascence is eternal for Nicola, and I think that this eternal nascence is incredibly important for his character. For Nicola and Melania seem to occupy different sides of life and death cycle. Say that Nicola represents life and Melania represents death. Rather, it seems like both land somewhere in the middle of each process. Melania is constantly resisting of scarlet rot and is in this perpetual state of dying, and Nicola is in this constant state of nascence. He is showing an abundance of life and burgeoning potential. Special thanks to Quaylark for making this clear to me. So Nicola is nascent, but he's also abundant, and I think that's another extremely key word for him. For example, there's this cut weapon called the Abundance and Decay Twinlet, which symbolizes the twins and suggests that the twins were one and inseparable things and hold wounds of both abundance and decay between them. Not to mention, the word abundance is also literally spoken by Nicola in his content, and thanks to a very recent discovery by Segment 2, we know this kind of dialogue about to voice is Nicola's. And here, he appears to be leading you towards a unique ending for the game, and he walks his ability to make life flourish, stating, "This is for thee, mine abundance, when about you, quench thy thirst, thy frame, blossom and bud, time and again, grow life, stronger, until the day cometh, when thou canst share in my dream. Elden Ring, O Elden Ring, begin order most telling, my 10. And before I go on, I do want to say that Nicola talking about his abundance is cut content, and you should really take it as canon, but I think it does give us a deeper look at not only the powers that they might have had, but also the world that he would create. Goes on to say, thou comest from a press And I love that by mine, all things will flourish, whether graceful or mine. Because Mikola isn't enforcing any real notions of good or evil here. Instead, in the new world of his making, he simply wants all things to flourish. I feel like that is a very unique viewpoint for a character in Soul's Game. Not to mention, Mikola is certainly one of the few beings that is capable of creating this world. That's because he is an Empyrean. He is one of the very few who were candidates chosen by the Two Fingers to succeed Queen Marika and become God, to usher in a age. Now we can go into an entire debate about why the twins are valid Empyreans and why they're more conflicted, but honestly that could almost be an entire video of itself. So for now I'll just give the simple answer, which is that these twins were really valid Empyreans because they have singular heritage from God, but that this singular heritage was probably also responsible for their afflictions as well, due to the almost incestual implications of such a thing. Why do I feel like it was George R.R. Martin that made this part?
Well,
Anyway, let's move into the early childhood years of Mikola's eternal childhood. Mikola's early years were clearly quite inspired by their father, Radigan, who fostered a bit of a fundamentalist streak in his works, and Mikola would go on to invent fundamentalist incantations of his own, dubbed Discus of Light and Triple Wings of Light, which he gave as gifts to his father. These gifts reveal that Radigan and Mikola had a good relationship, and Radigan must have been proud of his son because these two spells do represent those two key fundamentals of the Golden Rule, namely that there is a law of causality, which is a branching cause and effect that goes outwards, but also that there is a law of regression, that all things are eternally to converge once again. And in gratitude, Radigan countered with a gift of his own, showing Mikola Radigan's Rings of Light. These incantations would go on to become fundamentalist spells, as they are true to those two concepts that form the basis of the Golden Order. But there is another aspect of Golden Order fundamentalism, and that is the persecution of those who live in death. Hunters of these undead would attempt to stamp them out with spells such as Order's Blade and Litany of Proper Death, which deal additional damage against those who live in death and prevent them from resurrecting. To recap, those who live in death exist because of Godwin the Golden, and was one of the early sons of Marika and Godfrey, who was eventually killed with a fragment of the Rune of Death. And the Rune of Death eventually spread its undeath throughout the lands between via Deathroot. And there is an entire debate that we can have here about whether the persecution of those who live in death is even true to the core principles of fundamentalism. Goldwings certainly doesn't seem to think so. In fact, according to the healing spell, Goldmask laments the hunters of those who live in death, deeming them to be fanatics who wanted nothing more than an absolute evil to contend with. And the reason I bring up this debate at all is because you could argue that Mikola was on the side of these fanatic hunters, as he created multiple weapons that were capable of effectively slaying those who live in death. For example, this is Golden Epitaph, and it is a sword that was made to commemorate the death with the Golden, first of the demigods to die. It is infused with the humble prayer of a young boy and reads, "Brother, Lord brother, please die of death." So this weapon is an effective tool of killing those who live in death permanently, and clearly the young boy who created it was Mikola. Can infer this because the sigil that appears when you use this blade's skill is the Hailing Tree sigil, and once activated, this ability, called Last Rites, use the sword with a holy power that prevents those who live in death from reviving. But beyond this being a central tool to slay those who live in death, is that this weapon points towards an early kinship between Mikola and Godwin, a relationship that might have made it all the more painful when Godwin's soul would perish, but his body would remain, supporting Deathroot. This is interesting, as it gives Mikola a legitimate emotional grievance against those who live in death. And it's almost a bit hypocritical, I think, for what I believe to be Mikola's character, as We previously established that he might have been this character who wants all life to flourish, but I guess that principle might not extend to those who live in death for him. This sword might not be the only representation of Mikkela's relationship with Buddha. That relationship is potentially strengthened even more when we consider this statue found in Alfale before it depicts a larger figure who is clearly embracing the two Imperial twins, Mikkela and Melania. But who is this larger figure? Could be their parent, or Radigan. But then it doesn't have their signature hair braid, and instead it has this long, wavy hair. What's more, the statue set is flat-chested, which appears to rule out at least. And after reading a good amount of debate online about this, I think it's a fair conclusion to say that this statue represents Godwin, who himself does seem to have long, wavy hair. This statue being in mind here really tells a story. It's a story of two gifted but afflicted siblings who were supported by their older brother, but then they were left alone, as their older brother would become the first demigod to die. And this is the only statue in this location. Far more prominent in the area are these statues, which depict two siblings left alone after their mother died. There was one sibling, Mikkela, who was forced to remain as a young child, and another who grew up in great pain, eventually losing vision and limbs, rot and decay. Statues are everywhere in the Healing Queen, and they tell that sorrowful story. They are an early sign of Mikkela's extreme empathy for his sister, and they foreshadow his desperate attempts to give her a terrifying ending. And so, the young Mikkela abandoned fundamentals. Do nothing to treat Melania as a constant rot. This was the beginning of unalloyed gold. So, what is unalloyed gold? Well, an alloy is something that's created when you combine metals, usually because you want to create a stronger compound at the expense of its purity. So, if you were to view this gold as if it were a metal, which I think is something that the law wants you to do, considering the implications of the tarnished and everything like that, then this golden ore definitely an alloy metal. Just look at all the foreign powers that it's absorbed in the interest of strength. For example, Godfrey and his Crucible Knights were enlisted to devastate Marika's enemies, and the ancient dragons were won over and eventually became part of Leyndell's forces. Even the House of Erdtree and the Moon were married at one point. Literally. After all, as Mikkela puts it, all things can be conjoined under the Gold Order, so I think it was definitely open to fusing factions and ideologies to an extent, as long as it made a treasured Golden Order ally stronger. So hopefully now you understand what I mean when I say that Mikkela's gold is unalloyed. It is pure, it is untainted, and it is perhaps a singular ideology. And if you subscribe to the idea that that content is still representative of Mikkela, then I would say that his ideology is what I had Mikkela quote earlier, that in his new world, all things should be allowed to flourish, whether graceful or malign, and that is his pure ideology. Though, of course, that is my speculation based on past content as well, so please keep that in mind. But Mikkela's unalloyed gold couldn't have just been this metaphysical concept of pure ideology. It was a physical material as well. For example, this is an unalloyed gold water lily, said to have been beloved by Mikkela. This is a bewitching brand, blessed with an incantation of unalloyed gold. Unalloyed gold decorated the armor and shields of his soldiers. It was inserted into their weapons, and most importantly, perhaps, it was forged into a set of armor for his sister, Melania. Remember, the whole reason Mikkela embraced unalloyed gold in the first place, it seems, was because he thought that it could treat his sister's accursed rot, while fundamentalism did not. And he was right, for Melania's scarlet rot is no mere disease. It's literally the divine essence of an outer god, and Melania is its vessel. that will one day bloom into an improved goddess. But unalloyed gold is one of the few materials in the game that can ward away such meddling of the outer gods. Another example are mirror helms like the one that Ichi wears, which literally reflects the influence of the outer gods. Personally, I think the reason that unalloyed gold inhibits the meddling of the outer gods is because it is a pure metal and potentially a pure ideology. But if that's not enough reason for you, then Quelaag actually has a great deal where he breaks down potential reasons at chemical level. But at any rate, reasons aside, Mikola crafted needles of unalloyed gold, which can be inserted into the tortured flesh of one afflicted by rot to alleviate their suffering and forestall the effects of the rot. And for the needle's descriptions, the outer god of rot isn't the only one affected by this. Our character actually uses the final version of this unalloyed gold needle to subdue the outer god of frenzy, which is something you might want if you decided to be a terrible person and burn down the world. Anyway, when we first find Mikola's needle, it's broken, snapped in half, and picked up by a commander at the very center of the Scarlet Swamp. But once this needle has been repaired, we can give the golden needle to Millicent, proving that it does indeed work to forestall the rotting sickness, to remove pain and nightmares inflicted. It is, after all, lovingly crafted by Mikola himself.
Well, this is a rather deep. The world is there's nothing better than substance than life.
In crafting these needles and pursuing unalloyed gold, Mikola is attempting to save his sister from her affliction. It seems like this objectively good deed, which is a rare sight in Elden Ring, especially for a demigod whose strengths have been known to tip them towards madness, and that is what makes Mikola such a pure and likable character in Elden Ring. So it's no wonder really that Melania venerated her brother. She is a character of undefeated prowess, and she's an Imperium, no less. Yet she dedicated her blade to Mikola, and Mikola alone. She believes that he possesses the wisdom, the allure of a god, and that he is the most fearsome Imperium of all. The story of their bond and duty to one another is legendary, and it's something that becomes quite clear when we explore Mikola's healing tree and see these statues depicting their embrace all around. And if you were one of the many defiled outcasts in Elden Ring, you too might have felt inspired by this story, and you might have felt inclined to earn Mikola's favor and make the long pilgrimage towards your salvation, towards the distant divine healing tree and its grace that was Mikola's domain. So first, what even is the Healing Tree? Well, it's pretty obvious that it's a sort of Erd tree. For one, Erd tree avatars have clearly emerged from it, which they only do in order to protect the Erd tree's own offspring. And then there's the Healing Tree Knight armor, which confirms that the Healing Tree ultimately failed to grow into an Erd tree. One thing I've been wondering is, when exactly was the Healing Tree planted then? If we knew when, then we might be able to guess at its purpose. Was it planted before or after the shattering of the Elden Ring? Because when the Elden Ring was shattered, golden seeds flew from the Elden Ring, scattering across the various lands as if life itself knew that its end had come. These seeds beat these little illusory trees and likely spawned the minor Erd trees as well, so I think it's a fair assumption that Mikola might have planted the Healing Tree from an Erd tree seed. And if that was indeed the case, then it should have happened after the shattering, for before that, the Erd tree was considered perfect and eternal, and it wasn't even believed that Erd tree seeds could exist. But on the flip side, the golden epitaph sword that we mentioned earlier likely existed before the shattering, as it was created to commemorate Godwin's death, and this sword displays the Healing Tree sigil when its weapon art is activated. So one could infer that the Healing Tree must have existed at this point too, right? So I guess it's always possible that Mikola somehow procured an Erd tree seed before the shattering, or simply grew it from his own being, as he is a scion of the Golden Plough after all. But whatever the case, Mikola clearly decided that growing such a tree was important, and he even went so far as to water it with his own blood. This confirms that the Earth Tree is indeed a blood-sucking parasite. Sort of. I mean, you have to admit, it is pretty disturbing that an Earth Tree could flourish in such a manner. But this does lead us to the final question, which is, why was the Halig tree planted? What was the point of it? And at the end of the day, the main reason is always going to be because it's like the Earth Tree. It's natural to compare them, and the item descriptions seem to want you to compare them as well. And tree is this enormous icon of power and faith in the lands between, so evoking that and inspiring worship is really a valuable thing. But the Earth Tree was only really an icon of faith in its later years. Before that, it was a symbol of abundance, with light as warm as the gentle sun that could gradually heal all those who bathed in its rays. But perhaps most importantly, during this time of abundance, it would drip sacred dew, sap, or tears that could bestow blessings, form crystal tears, and even be embedded into talismans. These were treasured things, and naturally, this was an extremely valuable symbol for Mikola to evoke, since he is himself associated with dew and abundance in the cut content. And his Halig tree did drip with dew. The greenish amber of the Halig tree can even be seen in cut content items. It even looks as if it's mingled with a bit of Mikola's own blood. And that signature green hue of Halig tree amber is also seen in the Halig tree knight sword, which is not a cut weapon, and this was modeled after the Aryan Knight's own swords, except it was embedded with the Halig tree instead of glintstone. Okay, so the Halig tree is a great symbol of faith and power and abundance, and Mikola is related to abundance in the cut content, but what else does the Halig tree add in terms of value? Well, the Halig tree itself is something of a vessel fit for a
Finally.
Mikola plants himself inside it later on. Melania returns home to it, and speaking of it being a home, many of the creatures have made their home within the tree, and within the brace that supports it as well. And I guess you could also argue that the Halig tree might be a sort of a tool to be used. After all, America was the Earth tree to use in such a way, using its roots to absorb people after their death, and perhaps even its branches to rebirth life. And then the Earth tree is later used as a prison, with thorns that are almost entirely impenetrable. But I don't think Mikola planned to use the Halig tree in such a way. Perhaps the biggest difference between the Halig tree and the Earth tree is that the Halig tree was built in a largely inhospitable region. It is extremely difficult to reach, and unlike the Earth tree, it might not really be designed for the benefit of the vast majority of the world. As it stands, the Halig tree strikes me as being more like the painted world from Dark Souls. It's a place for the outcasts, reticle, and the malign, not to mention the low and the meek, who are specifically named in the description of the sacred crown helm. While many of the Scarlet Rock Afflicted seem to be here because of the eventual decay of the Halig tree, I think that there are a number of refugees here that would have been here before that, namely the Misbegotten, the Crystallian, these stray mages of Raya Lucaria, and of course Loretta, who deemed this place to be a great haven for the despised Albinorics. The second generation Albinorics could carry a weapon called the Ivory Sickle, which reads, "These weapons are evidence of their dedication to the Halig tree, despite never having entered its presence." And we really don't find a single Albinoric within the Halig tree. I'll admit, I do find this a bit strange. You do find quite a few Albinorics so close to the Halig tree. It's a bit strange when they don't know just that little bit further. The reason given for the first generation of Albinorics not being in the Halig tree is given by Albus, who says that their faded legs are the reason for that. But yet, we find them defending Mikola and his Halig tree all the same at the Ordina liturgical town, which takes us to the Halig tree via a puzzle within an Everjail. The word liturgical means relating to public worship, and this town is fittingly filled with many statues of Mikola sitting alone, cradling what might have become the Halig tree back when it was still just a sapling. I also find it interesting that the Halig tree is never called out as competing with the Earth tree, or never called out for housing all these hundreds of things. Perhaps the House of the Earth tree was happy to see ungraceful folk leave their lands. Perhaps the Halig tree was extremely extremely well hidden from everyone and they didn't know, or perhaps Mikola could just get away with it because it was beloved by all. For example, the bewitching branch is an item that you can get from Mikola's lilies, and it is blessed with an incantation of unalloyed gold and reads, "The Imperial Mikola is loved by many people. Indeed, he has learned very well how to compel such affection." And that second part that says he has learned how to compel affection, to me that's saying that Mikola is very good at knowing how to inspire others' affection to his own advantage. And nowhere is this more clear, I think, than at Castle Sol. This is the Secret Medallion. It's furnished with that signature green hammer and it features the Haley ring in the back. It allows you to access a secret lower level of the Grand Lift of Rome and progress through the consecrated snowfields to this sacred place. Having both halves of this secret medallion is therefore extremely desirable, for the medallion has another name. It's called Mikola's Favor. Gideon is the all-hearing man in this dialogue, and he slaughtered an entire village just for one half of this medallion, but he did not find it in Albus's possession. But you can, and the other half is in Castle Sol, right before a nameless phantom, which says this: "Lord Mikola, forgive me. The sun has not been swallowed up as Malak. Your body remains soulless. I will never set my eyes upon it now. Your divine haligtree." So this phantom seemingly has, or I guess had, one half of the medallion, and yet he laments that he will now never set eyes upon the haligtree. To me, this suggests that Mikola might have been withholding a second. Of the medallion from him, or that this phantom believed that he could solicit the second half of the medallion from Mikola and make it to the haligtree if he achieved his goal here at Castle Sol and basically earned Mikola's favor. What exactly was supposed to happen here at Castle Sol? What does it mean when the phantom says, "The sun has not been swallowed, our prayers were lacking, your comrade remains soulless"? It means, I think, that the residents of Castle Sol and Mikola were attempting to restore the dead soul of Godwin the Golden, and restoring chivalry when a fragment of the Rune of Death was used to kill Godwin. It was also being used at the exact same time to kill Rani, and since they perished at the same time, Rani lost her body, and Mikola's dead brother, Godwin, perished with soul alone. And despite this death seeming so final, Mikola clearly believes that some sort of ritual performed here could restore the soul of his comrade. For example, here's some more dialogue from a different phantom that reads, "Read son, frigid son of soul, surrender yourself to the eclipse, grant life to the soulless bones." The question is how? How does that work? How does an eclipse restore life to Godwin? Now you can just take Mikola at face value and trust that he knows what he's doing, or we can try to learn as much as we can about the eclipse and see if we can reason out the mechanism behind this process. So at Castle Sol, we find the Eclipse Châtel, which reads, "Storied sword and treasure of Castle Sol that depicts an eclipsed sun drained of colour. In Sol, the sight of an eclipse inspires a dreadful awe, preventing an onlooker from averting his gaze." The most important part of this description, though, is the part that says it's the sword sword of Castle Soul, as this proves that the veneration of the eclipse here goes back a long way. But what does an eclipse represent? So, according to the eclipse crest shields, the eclipsed sun, drained of color, is the protective star of soulless demigods. Honestly, I think calling it a protective star is kind of the closest we come to understanding the mechanism here, because you reason that a protective star might be a sort of outer god that lends them power, though that is just speculation. The description goes on to say that the sun in eclipse is said to be the symbol of the wandering mausoleum where the soulless demigods slumber. So that it says demigods plural here. Now, this could be because the wandering mausoleums come to house many demigods from a gameplay point of view, because you take their references here. But it could be a word that is slightly lost in translation, as the Japanese version of the word demigods does not specify whether it's a plural or whether it's a singular word. So my take on this is that I think the wandering mausoleums became necessary when Godwin died. I think that the mausoleum was intended to be a resting place for him initially, but then also for any future demigods, as all of a sudden all of their true deaths had become possible as well, with the theft of a fragment of the rune death. Mausoleum knights themselves are these headless soldiers who behead themselves, willingly following their master into death. As such, they become these headless spirits, tied to the land, so that they might better defend the mausoleums. They also carry eclipse-crested shields, and the eclipse is said to aid the mausoleum knights by keeping destined death at bay. It is their symbol. Keeping destined death at bay, maybe it's helping to keep their souls tied to the land. We could speculate for a long time on how the eclipse has this power, and I've done my best. Maybe other people have a better take on it, and maybe you guys do in the comments. But in the end, it's simpler just to trust that Mikola knew what he was doing with the eclipse at Castle Sol, and when he wanted to block out the sun and restore onwards. All that said, can't trust him too much, I guess, because it's important to remember that this ritual failed. According to its phantom, the sun was not swallowed. I guess the protective star of the soulless demigods did not listen to their prayers. It did not. But it is really fascinating to learn that such a thing might even be possible. That Godwin, whose soul seems to be as dead as Rani's body, might actually not be. So if his soul is somewhere, where has it fled to? Part of me wonders, if his soul is lost, then maybe it's lost within a dream. One theory I did come up with regarding the mechanism by which Godwin's soul is brought back by the eclipse is that his soul might be brought back by bringing about a sort of artificial dust with the eclipse. That's because those who live in death are called dust-born, after all, so there is an association between night and death, to be sure. And there's also an association between death and sleep. For example, when you pursue Thea's questline, you use her as a medium to enter Godwin's deathbed dream, which is an entire dreamscape where the Dragon Fortisax is futilely fighting against the death in his companion. Then there's Roger, who speaks this line of dialogue as he is on the precipice of succumbing to deathroot.
Lately, I feel I'm on the precipice of falling to.
I just wanted to kind of talk about some more true to
He does say he's about to fall into sleep. So, in conclusion, a realm of death does seem accessible through dream. And I think this is the perfect time to mention that Mikola has an alter ego. Some say she is a comely young girl. Others are sure he is a boy. This is where we have to talk about the enigmatic figure named Saint Trina. Perhaps the biggest in-game clue about Saint Trina's true identity is Trina's lily, which bears this undeniable resemblance to Mikola's lily of unalloyed gold. Its description reveals that it is a symbol of faith in Saint Trina, dulls the senses, preventing agitation. Naturally, it is used to craft a bunch of sleep-inflicting items like Saint Trina's arrow, which states that the sweet oblivion of sleep can become quite the habit, and it tells of the priests of Saint Trina who use these arrows to spread their teachings, though the Japanese description seems to specify that these were more of a tool used for their rituals. So it's largely left to your imagination as to what rituals these priests might have been performing, though I will mention that it seems Saint Trina might actually be able to be found somewhere within sleep. This is suggested by Feather's cookbook, which reads a record of crafting techniques left by a man who was utterly captivated by Saint Trina. He continued the search for her in his slumber. We get a side profile of her in the hilt of Saint Trina's sword, which hints at that flowing, astray hair that she has, and then we get a much better front-on view of this feminine adult form upon Saint Trina's torch. The carvings depict Saint Trina, but in adult form, somewhat unnervingly. The carving is indeed unnerving, and it's certainly strange considering Mikola is supposed to be eternally a child. It raises the question, what has to happen for Mikola to grow up into this? And why is this bizarre creature the adult form that he takes? Another question worth asking, I think, is whether Mikola even has total control of Saint Trina. What if he's in a similar situation to Marin or Radigan, where their alter ego is an opposite of sorts, and able to act almost as if they have their own free will? So all of this is definitely a little bit of a disturbing view of what Saint Trina could be, but I guess we do have cut content that does somewhat reassure me that their alter ego is still a benevolent person. This cut content was first showcased by Sekido Dubi, and this cut content is truly ancient. It exists in one of the oldest versions of the game that we know about, so a lot has probably changed since then, but regardless, here we can learn about Saint Trina's crystal ball, which once read, a crystal ball full of mist, symbol of Saint Trina of the Cradle Song, copies dream mist from a sleeping being. Dream mist was once used as an ingredient in rare and potent physics, may the quietude of slumber to all and sundry, even to those whose red eyes burn with the flames of frenzy. So this reveals that this cut version of Saint Trina even once had sympathy for those afflicted by the flame of frenzy. They even went so far as to teach the merchants their songs.
Our song derives from an old lullaby sung for us. Long inside our children, whatever it was is no longer. It left us to sing, despite the cursed flame.
The description of Mikola's songs as a lullaby is referenced by the modern-day sleep pop description, which reads, like a lullaby or a quagmire, its light purple haze irresistibly draws its victims down into sleep. Sweet dreams. This is the closest thing you have to Dream Mist as well, which was an item that you could again once collect from sleeping enemies. And after you did this, you were supposed to sell this Dream Mist to the merchants, who used it to quell their flame of frenzy. But as the merchants once said, whoever it was that sings now sings no longer. And this is a detail that has remained intact even in the final version of Elden Ring, with Saint Trina's sword stating that Saint Trina's appearance was as sudden as their disappearance. Something clearly happened to Mikola that prevented them from continuing their work as Saint Trina, and that is what we will discuss next. At some point, Mikola embedded himself into the Haligtree. Why he did this is never explicitly stated, but I think we can make a good attempt at puzzling it out. So, Mikola famously watered the Haligtree with his own blood, since it was a sapling, so I guess you could argue that he embedded himself in it to simply feed the tree more, which I guess is possible because the tree does eventually wither without Mikola inside it, and Gideon seems to tie his removal with the death of the Haligtree, or it turning into a husk. But I don't think that would be the only reason why he embedded himself. For instance, look closely at the Haligtree roots, and you'll see the form of a tree-like woman, and where her womb should be, there's a gap that once contained Mikola's cocoon, cradled by the Haligtree. Now, either Mikola was attempting to fuse into and become this woman-like figure, who might even be the adult form shown on Saint Trina's porch, or there was a rebirth occurring here. This is a cocoon within a womb, after all, so rebirth could have been the intent here, but Regardless, it seems things ended prematurely, for Mikola would eventually be ripped out of the womb, and the Halig tree would split and decay. And so, when we arrive at the Halig tree and town of Elfale that is built into the brace that supports it, the music here hits extremely hard. This place is just so sorrowful. For the Halig tree and Mikola's lilies and even St. Trina's lilies all wilting, and all who live here are just hoping and praying for their lord to return. I love the little detail of the guards looking outwards and sitting dejectedly. To make matters worse for them, it was here that they realized that the sacred light inside them would explode upon their imminent deaths, and yet, in spite of this, their spirit ashes show their faith and state. May the flash of our deaths guide Mikola's return. And Melania is here too, holding to the husk of Mikola, dreaming and waiting for Mikola to return, and believing full well that he will.
Soft a corpse left in my wake. As I awaited his return.
Melania's set reveals that she believes her brother will keep his promise. So what was that promise, I wonder? Was it merely to return, or was it something more? How much does Melania know? Why did she fight Radahn? We'll have to talk about all of that in another video. So, there is still faith. There's even this one phantom in the consecrated snowfields who has somehow puzzled out who took Mikola, and even where they are, he is pointed towards the portal that takes you to Mogwin Palace and Moog. So, indeed, it was the demigod Moog who somehow came to the Halig tree and absconded with Mikola's infant form. And it's with him that this story ends. Or maybe it's where this story truly begins. So, if you're not familiar, Moog is the omen son of Godfrey and to be an omen of royalty, he was born into a wretched mire of filth in the subterranean shunning grounds below Bladedale capital. But unlike his mother Morgoth, who reviled his accursed blood, Moog reveled in it. And it was assumedly because of this accursed blood that he chanced a meeting with an outer god called the Mother of Truth. And as Moog stood before her, deep underground, his accursed blood erupted with fire, and he was truly besotted with the defilement that he was born into. Moog is just one of many characters who discovers a new identity in ways that they have been discarded by the world. And how could he not? For his defilement was validated by nothing less than an outer god. And as always, we know very little about this outer god. We know she is called the Mother of Truth, and the formless mother. We know that she desires wounds and bestows power upon her cursed blood. Her followers thrust their arms into her body to slit her blood flame. Followers of Moog share all the blood's power and send blood clots forth. There's even been some speculation in my recent shorts and my TikToks as well that the formless mother is also an outer god called Bloodstar. But the one thing that all outer gods seem to have in common is that they all require vessels to move them. So, in this case, the formless mother's vessel is Moog. For example, the sacred spear that he wields is a weapon, but it's also an instrument of communion, and Moog may well be doing her bidding with his actions. These actions included him starting a new dynasty called Moog below the earth, in the grounds of these ancient dynastic remains. This is a secret place, difficult to reach, and it was here that Moog brought the infant Mikola, born as he was from his lineage. I mean, that's how we see him in his opening cutscene, but in-game, Mikola seems to be back with a new crown here. You can even see it sat upon this giant pelvic bone, which seems to be a reference to the womb of the Halig prequel that was literally ripped from. And it's from the remembrance of the Bloodlord that we learn of Moog's intent here. He wished to raise Mikola to full godhood and become his consort, taking the role of monarch. To this this end, Moog has begun soliciting blood offerings to Mikla, and that certainly explains the state of so many who reside here. According to the Wolf-Blood's exaltation talisman, he claimed, render up your offerings of blood to your lord, drench my consorts, slake his people's thirst, his awakening shall herald that dynasty. And then, to return to Moog's remembrance, it's stated that, so far, this has all been vain, for no matter how much of his bloody bedchamber Moog tried to share, he received no response from the Imperium. So maybe nothing will happen. Or maybe, according to the Pure Blood Knight's medal, it is not yet time, for Moog yet slumbers beside the divinity. Be patient. Dynasty is nigh. What do you think? It's not hard to know. Even Gideon has them. Something does seem to be happening to Mikla in there. He has clearly grown for one since being taken, so maybe his adult form is manifesting. Personally, and this is really speculation, but this reminds me a lot of Berserk, which we know Miyazaki is always inspired by. Warning, really, you should watch that show, but there's this moment at the very end of the first chapter when Griffith betrays his companions in this sacrificial ceremony of carnage and bloodshed in order to be inaugurated and reborn as a god within an end of sorts. This reminds me of that. It also reminds me of scene with Griffith where he allows himself to be abused, basically, in order to get what he wants. So I wonder, what if this was also what Mikla wanted? We know that he is extremely proficient at compelling others to love him, and Moog is clearly enraptured. We know that Mikla is an Imperial prodigy, and we know that his sister, who knows him best, has total faith that he will return. So you'd think he's still in control of the situation somehow, but that could be a part of the tragedy, and Mikla, this benevolent being, might not have predicted this at all, and is now being completely taken advantage of. Maybe he did intend to be taken, but he's going to get more than he bargained for with the Mother of Truth. Or maybe Mikla's fate really is long gone. There's one other thing I want to mention. There's this place called Mikla's Hideaway in the Altus Plateau, and here we can loot Amber Starlight, which Celibus mentions is the very fate of a demigod. Clearly, since it's here, you'd think it's Mikla's fate, right? Then you also have to consider that art content that we are basing so much of this video on is very much removed from the game, because it might not fit the developer's intent. That's always possible. So I really hope you all bear that in mind, as I would really hate to promote ideas that are against the developer's vision for this character. But I really think that it's a possibility that we're going to one day enter the dream of this slumbering demigod. After all, there was once a cut character called Ino who was supposed to say the following, standing before Mikla's at Rosewood Falls. He says, "Finally, I found St. Trina's Lord Mikla's cadaver, such that I may aid you. So please, I hope you welcome your humble servant Weaver into your the world of your heart. Indeed, I beg you grant my wish, that when you transcend from Imperium to God, allow me a place by your side." Plus, if we do get DLC, it's going to need a great route to acquire, right? That's a huge gameplay mechanic in these games, and it'd be weird if DLC came and you couldn't get more great routes. Apart from Mikola's great route, the only one we don't know about also is Rani's great route, which was originally cast aside. So there's always that to consider. But hopefully we get some DLC to answer these questions. Or more likely we'll get DLC that will give us more questions that we started with. That's always how it seems to go. But I really hope they throw us some curveballs with this one, as they always do. But regardless, it's always a ton of fun to speculate with you all, so if you're still listening to this extremely long video, thank you for your time today. Thank you to Quayla for your description of me. Thank you, Miss Pat, for the incredible vision.
Starts doing his signature. Your
says all eight subs away. Yes, we're just closing in less than 80 subs away. So hit that subscribe button if you haven't. Tell a friend to subscribe already so we can hit that 8K milestone. I see Ace here in the chat with us. Appreciate y'all joining us for this prime time edition of Collision Discourse here. Silver Guy JJ, Blackmanta. Yeah,
Let me throw where you go further. I just want to show some
Bro.
but they're going to have really so as I've already sent the grants for this video.
Here we go. They see, giving you the tidbits. You got to follow along and come back every Sunday for Collision Course. Silver Guy JJ, last night's AEW Collision was from New York, New Jersey. What did you think about the crowd and overall thoughts on last night's Collision?
I just have that, to be honest. So, it was okay. Really good. It's quite a good so far. The crowd was inspired. The ass. The jersey. Yeah, it's okay. I mean, I because you did really show so last week. Not there like a let us down. I think we so it was wild. Let me know in practice.
Friday for the last week, Sunday again.
I mean, I'm sure I off of the state that I've been watching this. So, I mean, little bit less. Something can happen. It's enough time to be aware of something. I mean, that's like this little video.
Hey, you know what they say? The reason why New Yorkers are so pessimistic is because they know the light at the end of the light at the end of the tunnel is New Jersey. So. But yeah, so enough Jersey slander, Jersey jokes here. You got a number of comments here in the chat. You got Ace who says Ricky Starks is all about winning by any means. You got Incast who says heard it was a WWE crowd, a lot of LA nightclub there. He was getting love in Boston as well. We got one Mike Nation who says being from Jersey and was in the crowd. I agree with that disclaimer. Snack Games, what was your overall thoughts on last night's episode and the crowd included?
I think the crowd was pretty good. I mean, Cody was really hot crowd every single week. And, yeah, it's the item itself. It's nice, but keeps that lead. Site selection so far. We're really just going but show our I think we developed some new things. We got some new rings. I thought they as a show that incredible tag match last week I think. JJ hit it on the head where it's just it's the elemental building episode. It's super crazy.
Yeah, what I like to call the maintenance episode, where you have the big show, now we're going to set things up for when our next flow, whether that's the pay-per-view, whether that's another big episode of Collision. That's what last night's episode felt like. And it started off once again with the opening promos we heard from Max Caster, Anthony Bowman, and Daddy Ass of the Acclaim. Said they're ready for their AEW Trios Championship matchup and take the titles in New Jersey. We heard Darius Martin and Nacho Andretti said they're going to beat Bullet Club Gold. We had Bullet Club Gold said they're going to rebound from their loss last week. And we also had Ricky Starks pulling up in a nice little call where it said that he's ready for Collision tonight. So, what have you thought overall about these opening promos, and what did you think about this week's selection for the start of Collision tag game?
It's a bag. It's just like it's different, and sometimes we're bad, but other times it can really or it comes out of it, just tell the show. First match, we're gonna see it just for that. And on the card, you get it.
Fuck.
Yeah, it's like a quick little reminder of what's going on during the landscape here on Collision. I like how it's been panning out. And with Ricky arriving at the building, he showed up for our opening segment. Tony Schiavone brought him out to the ring, and Ricky had an extravagant entrance. He had his Owen Hart belt. He had his nice little Prada bag. He had about 30 seconds of fucking pyro. They spent a bill on this pyro. Man, Cody Rhodes seeing this pyro here. The fans tell him that he deserves it. So Newark are very big fans of Ricky Starks, it seems, and he certainly agrees. He says, talking about the bag, and he says, I know you guys are wondering what's in the bag. And he says, nothing's in it. I just wanted to show it off. What I treated myself to after I won the Owen last week, it's a nice little Prada bag. As for the controversial ending, he says that it isn't about how many he won, but how he won. It's about how many he won. And anyone in his Prada shoes would do the same thing. It's by any means necessary. So talk to him about how stylish he is. Talk to him about how good he is. He says that he doesn't want to be a pillar because he stands by himself. He says those pillars haven't won any moments, have they? And this brings out CM Punk. Punk comes out to no music, just stomps his way to the ring, and he says this is Stark's celebration, and he says he's only really bad at himself. He said he cheated some people before, and so has everyone else. He says maybe if the New Jersey Devils didn't before, they could have made it out of the first round. That's Punk responding to some moves he heard from the poor crowd, of course. Punk says that he can live with the win, but he says he can live with that loss, but can Ricky live with that win? He says that he beat CM Punk, but does he know if he can beat CM Punk without actually cheating? And Ricky responds after CM Punk looks like he's going up the ramp to leave. He says that his bag is about as empty as the one that Punk's been carrying around. And that brings CM Punk back to the ring. He says he is the real world champion and he carries that bag around for a reason. And this brings out the TNT champion, Christian Cage and Luchasaurus, to interrupt. They said they are contractually obligated to be here as champion, but this is taking way too long. He says Christian doesn't want to be in New Jersey longer than he has to be. He says that in my like CM Punk, what type of man walks around with the championship he didn't even win? To that. Guys, need you to speed this up, but at this point, this brings out Darby Allin. And Darby's promises to become the new face of TNT at All Out when he beats whoever is the TNT champion. He also calls out Ricky for bringing up the pillars. He says that he doesn't like that term. He views everyone as a pillar who's helping this company, including his good friend CM Punk. And he says for tonight, he suggests let's have a tag team match. Christian, you don't wrestle anymore, so give me the TNT champion. Versus me and CM Punk. Christian takes that as basically a bluff. tonight, CM Punk and Darby Allin versus Christian Cage and Ricky Starks. This felt like a WWE style promo, but let's be still get it so cheap in AEW. When they do it feels like a breath of fresh air. It feels very new and very different when they do these promos. And I do like a promo that sets up a main event. You don't always have to give us the whole entire lineup like AEW usually does. It is nice to go in and have some predictability about what the lineup is, and that matches can be made on the fly like it was here. So all in all, I think this segment accomplished a lot. You got Ricky Starks, kind of presenting himself as a main event heel, and walking around with that upset presentation and standing across from CM Punk. I think he has the chops that he can be a good foil for CM Punk, especially when it comes to promos. I thought Punk was good in his response. I thought Darby was even good, but Christian was the MVP of this whole entire segment. His comedic timing is unreal, and the heat he gets just adds to any segment he's a part of. Silver Guy, start us off. What did you think about this opening segment?
I hate to correct you and be great, but it was Louis D. that I'm proud of. Because, but as you said, it was but again, it kind of it fit the moment because we actually wanted to he had the same followers that and the only hard point. So I thought that worked out. Him coming out, that whole thing, the title was important. I felt like that was a real Cody shit. There was slides and it definitely gave me like a Cody real fun. Punk is such a prophet. He's a face, and yet he always he's a face. Stop crying. You know you're gonna get the fix. You're in the face. Stop crying. I'm telling you. Christian, he's been gold ever since the whole Super Show and Journey Jeff Williams. All the episodes does this thing. This was no different. Instead, the comedic timing played into it well. The whole thing about having the belt shit, not the championship that they couldn't even win. That was hilarious. Honestly, I was okay to see a Christian and Darby having more like they have all in, but good. But yes, it was a good way to set up Darby. I care about Darby. But yeah, I just figured it's obvious. You're doing Christian and Luchasaurus versus Sting and Darby. Yeah. That makes the most sense to do. And that feels like a big matchup to Sting and Sting and Christian have been in the ring together since 2005. Yeah, 2005. Didn't Christian beat Sting? No. Yes, I think you're right. Yeah. Like early get the belt back. He lost
Motherfucking bitch.
Then Abyss runs in, and then Christian went to Abyss. But he was a part of that world. That feud, yeah, he was a part of that feud deal. And he turned the first time he turned heel. So that's what I like. Second, what did you think about this opening segment?
One thing I've never appreciated about it is two bosses now, land walkers, and you guys, that's what it's being loved is. It's just like natural, it's so good, and it's just, it comes to us like effortless, and when somewhere else is effortless, it's something better. Everything about the second, I think that the crowd was fun, everything was actually kind of not really playing, but that reality, like coming out sometimes out because they got it's sick, and sometimes it's just necessary. And but it's one way because I didn't go a huge oil brand support TNT title gun like specifically designated for like escape, and they like always on that I was like, oh, they're gonna use this instead of the match, whatever, maybe use the 9 title runner, and that when they're staying at it's like no longer for deliver
hey, people complaining about TNT Championship not having feuds, and
see they when this interpretation, and I like everything that I'm having a tag match at Olin. That's pretty good. Get Sting on the card, clear to see him, you know, kind of however Sting likes so tables. It's kind of you can tell the guy but this was a good segment that definitely set up me as that event deal on issue with the TNT title being present and that Owen Hart Championship, despite not being a title that some people went back and forth, it gives the feel as a collision a prize title fight for, whether it's the Owen, like you put the Owen as a representation on the line in a future match, and you want them as the title, so I think they did a good job, especially on one of these, to give Lucia that kind of title team.
Actually, I don't know if you guys realized during the promo that yes no shit came back up. Remember that happened a couple weeks ago with the yes no thing? I forget which second that came up during the promo.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's related or if that's a production error. We'll see. We'll keep track of when we see that.
Came back up again during. I mean, that's pretty ironic. It came up again during
We did see next a backstage segment from earlier today as Andrade El Idolo was not allowed in the building due to his actions from last week and the fact that we have an AEW World Trios Championship matchup later in tonight. And then we had our opening contest, which was Action Andretti and Darius Martin, as I like to call them, like going up against Bullet Club Gold, Switchblade Jay White, and Brock Juice Robinson. This was a nice little opportunity for a rebound for Bullet Club Gold, but they were facing a lot faster opponents than they faced last week. A lot more high-flying, a totally different style from FTR, so they had a little trouble with these guys, keeping them on their back foot, but eventually Bullet Club Gold and kind of a quick cohesion that we're talking about in the best 2 out of 3 falls, that kind of panned out in the end where they really had a dominant ending to this matchup where it was clear they were the better team. A barrage of double teams ending with Juice hitting the forward DDT, followed by Switchblade hitting the Blade Runner. 1, 2, 3, pinning Action ready. 10 minutes, 18 seconds. Bullet Club Gold back on the winning ways, and we will see if that will continue as they continue. We got Action Ready, Extra Plate, an opportunity to get some revenge, as it was announced later in the night that next week on Collision it will be a trios matchup. First time Robinson and the Guns of Bullet Club Gold will team up together in 6-man tag team action against AAA Mega Champion El Hijo del Vikingo, Action Andretti, and Darius Martin. Sober Guy JJ, what did you think about this tag team matchup here? The whole big club. I thought it was cool.
it was good match. Good match for the show. How we did still out for it. Showcasing action playing you follow. Obviously, where they go off the loss last week, main show. But yeah,
man, give it a
good match. Good match on a lot of good openings. I mean, nothing else, nothing spectacular, but good, very fun. Very fun.
Stacking.
Yeah, I think the match that you're lots of
Went about 10 minutes long, so that was good. Get this guy's abilities to match until it was sold. I like the guns being right side. It's just great because you get those asshole chances on what happens, and I'm starting this leadership in a good way. So we're gonna have like focus. That's really what they kind of needed is a pair of mentor training to get to that next level. I'm not the biggest fan of action play. More because action and ready doesn't look good for me, but I at least know the areas where the wings healing up. So that you get injured when they reunite. Listen. Taxes and one member of top flight being injured.
Jesus, guys, what are we doing?
They ready to go out there and break a leg.
I mean, when you think about it, man, Dante's not having a great 2023 person. Injured that he was sky without pleasure.
Broken leg and a broken heart.
Oh my god. That was completely back. Reference hit top flight and Austin went to his water mission.
That sounds like only
I said it. My so I don't know if you guys don't say it, and the postman announced that the crowds or someone could to help it or something like that. And the music playing and everything, something was himself there. But we'll talk about our credit later. I'm sure this is the latter question. But this was good.
Yeah, I did notice that. I did feel like something was supposed to come out, whether it's FDR or somebody else. But hey, I mean, sometimes weird stuff like that happens.
rather have everything as a jar about that frame. Because
We're going to quick look back at Willow Nightingale winning the Women's Owen Hart Foundation tournament last week and then losing to Athena just before this honor because ROH hates having happy endings. It's about the time. Shit. Athena and Willow Nightingale definitely go out of your way to watch it. Have you watched it yet? Second.
After my little watch that the rest of the sports honors like
do it, sir. Do it. Go out of your way. Athena and Willow Nightingale are the best women's matches of the year. Any comments, Silver Guy?
You know me, I was fairly entertained. The wrong person is definitely the wrong person. I felt like once they beat it, being a better, she will definitely win.
Yeah.
That'll be her moment.
Never
great
get those. Man, Willow's like coach. Like, final battle. You're gonna finally finish the story. Next we had Miro, the come out for singles competition, but we got a little twist. So the last two times we've seen Miro's competition. This time he's facing Nick Camarado, so more of a guy that can keep up with his size and strength. And Camarado not only did that, but he jumped the front line on the stage during his entrance, sent him into the steel steps, some shoulders in the corner, had Miro in trouble as the match officially starts, but Miro avoids the charge into the corner. It's the jumping Mashka kick that sets up game over. And still, despite jumping in from behind, Miro gets the win. In a minute and 26 seconds, the Miro is some beast. Nick Navarado, I thought despite him losing in 1 minute 26 seconds, that's probably as good as you could look. If Silver guy JJ, what's
You just gotta keep having a Miro run through everybody. Keep going into the ADS. That's great to see. But yeah, I just figured out good tag that he's saying the show actually. This thing ain't good. They gotta see.
You're right. You're definitely right. Stanky.
As someone who's seen a lot of Colorado animals, I'm sure I thought something close to his size and just keep going. But I definitely agree with Jason. This has got to go somewhere like where you can't just extend sheets that like a total storyline there's a bring it back to that. But this fish, either buy him or shoot him. He said, I'll do it. So there's got to be something, some kind of story.
Yeah, I was waiting to see unless you just wanted to look dominant with it.
A part of me is like, okay, so now he's defeated the show. Now he has some showing from behind. He's still like my next thought after that is that it's gonna buy back every people now.
That's what you're gonna have to do. You're gonna have to put two guys in, two local talents, let them run the move, and then eventually, like Silver Guy said, we're gonna need a feud. We're gonna need something we can actually see his team into an actual story.
Eventually, it's Miro versus Tom Light, and that's how the other one gets it.
I'm assuming at some point he fights it out.
Hey. If they have, let's get in a quick game. AEW World Trios Championships up for grabs. The House of Black defending against the acclaimed and daddy-ass Billy Gunn. Max Caster starts his rap on the outside, and Buddy Matthews is like, I ain't gonna let you say it. I'm gonna knock you the fuck out here with a knee out of nowhere. Y'all love so great. So great. This matchup, though, I was blown away by how fast this matchup went. It's caught in Black and something face. We get King keep beating up on everybody on the outside at first, gets the ring, drops a back splash for two. Matthew drives Caster into the corner. Caster manages to send out Matthews outside and then kicks him away, allowing Caster to finally tag Billy Gunn in. Billy Gunn starts cleaning house. He's taking care of everybody, but Brody King comes in, blasts him with the clothes.
Bro, what the fuck?
To measure, hit him with the black bears. 1, 2, 3. The House of Black retain the AEW World Trios Championships. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, those were the notes for all 4 minutes and 30 seconds. I literally gave you the play-by-play for everything that happened, because this was mostly about the post-match. as the House of Black sat there, as Billy Gunn was trying to get, his composure back, and we see Malachi whisper to Daddy Ass. Daddy Ass starts to get emotional. He gets into the corner, and he starts taking off his boots, untying his boots, taking them off. You have Anthony Bowman's trying to get Billy's attention, asking him what's going on, and then we get Daddy Ass leave his boots in the center of the ring, which is the universal sign as a professional wrestler for retirement. Did we just see the final match of Daddy Ass Billy Gunn, or did we see the start of a new story involving Daddy Ass Billy Gunn? What do you think? What did you think about the matchup? But more importantly, what did you think about this post-match here? Stacky.
Match got so where they start getting that great one podcast would be awesome. Just like keep that momentum going. This is supposed to be a title match. Give the sense of urgency. More of the people as quickly as possible. Thanks for the post match. That is start something new for Billy Gunn. Because the Daddy Ass very appreciated. It's just you want to sometimes don't want to just don't want to retire. That's the big part of it, and it's just like sometimes you have to spend know when something's gonna get played at home. That's what you think. Hopefully that's what this is. But one other thing is talking about fear of things like that. Maybe it's still gonna get up there. The fact that accuracy that would be interesting. But anyway,
When you want AEW to finish a feud, they started with that. What this is for Strickland and Keith Lee. So we're gonna do. What you think about this match and both matches with Daddy Ass?
Okay, I'm gonna speak to the subject of the fact that they were on the front
Silver guy.
Thank you, Nick. But it's going to be something before I subscribe to
No!
So this is not the full, so they're probably going to read out like a gig or something and figure out what's going to happen with it. I don't know what they're doing with it. I don't know what this delaying of a redemption story is. They better not even think about it. The Black January shit.
I mean, as the baby faces, you have to eventually give them their win back, and they've been dominating pretty much. Like, the matchup at Double or Nothing went a considerable amount of time, but this match went 4 minutes and basically ended in the same exact way as Double or Nothing, where Billy got caught into the ring and took advantage of his old ass and got caught with the black mask.
And honestly, I guess I can see they're trying to do like because I guess it's coming to Malachi said fucking with the whenever I had a match. Right after him at the moment. So then maybe it's cool. I think with my son doing better than me right now. I'm kind of trying to go. But right, my ass is in the front of the floor. You know what I'm saying?
Many is this.
Oh my god. Alright, folks. Thanks for tuning in.